Islam didn't just change Persia's faith, it transformed Iran forever. In this video, I'll reveal 100 ways it happened. Make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss what's ahead, because the 50th fact will shock you and the 100th will leave you speechless. Let's begin. Number 1. The cataclysm that sundered the ancient world and birthed the medieval was not a single event, but a slow, grinding dissolution, a seismic shift in the tectonic plates of civilization that would redraw the spiritual and political maps of humanity forever. This was the story of how an empire, a civilization that stood for a millennium as a pillar of the known world, was not merely conquered, but fundamentally and irrevocably transformed. We are conditioned to think of history as a series of dynastic successions, but we rarely comprehend the sheer scale of a civilizational metamorphosis. The process by which the soul of a people, their faith, their language, their art, their very identity is melted down and recast in a new mold. This was not a simple change of rulers. It was the end of one world and the painstaking creation of another upon its ashes. Number 2. To understand the totality of the transformation, one must first appreciate the monumental edifice that was the Sassanian Empire in its final days. For over 400 years, the House of Sassan had ruled Iran, the land of the Iranians, forging an identity that was deeply intertwined with the Zoroastrian faith and a rigid social hierarchy. This was a civilization that saw itself as the center of the world, the guardian of order against the chaos that lurked beyond its frontiers. Its kings were not mere mortals, but the chosen of Ahura Mazda, their authority absolute and divine. The empire's administrative machinery was a marvel of antiquity, a complex bureaucracy of ministries, tax collectors, and provincial governors that managed a vast and diverse territory stretching from Mesopotamia to the borders of India. Its military was legendary, built around the terrifying might of the Savaran, the elite armored cataphracts who were the precursors to the medieval knight. This was the power that had fought the Roman and Byzantine empires to a standstill for centuries, a civilization whose cultural influence radiated outwards, shaping art, architecture, and courtly etiquette from the Levant to China. Yet, this magnificent structure was built upon foundations that were beginning to crack. The final apocalyptic war with Byzantium, a conflict of unprecedented scale and brutality, had drained the treasury and decimated the population. More profoundly, the rigid caste system, which divided society between priests, warriors, scribes, and commoners, bred deep resentments, while a series of devastating plagues further weakened the social fabric. The Zoroastrian state church, while powerful, was often intolerant of dissenting faiths, creating internal friction. Thus, the storm that approached from the Arabian desert did not strike a healthy, unified state, but an exhausted giant, a magnificent tree whose core had been hollowed out by war, disease, and internal strife, ready to be toppled by a force it could neither comprehend nor counter. The initial transformation, therefore, was not one of culture or faith, but of raw power, the complete and utter shattering of a political and military order that had endured for centuries. Number 3. The first and most brutal transformation was the political decapitation of an ancient empire. The Arab conquest, which unfolded with bewildering speed between 633 and 631 CE, was not a gradual erosion of borders, but a series of catastrophic military defeats that systematically dismantled the Sassanian state. The process began not as a full-scale invasion, but as probing raids into the rich lands of Mesopotamia, the empire's economic heartland. The Sassanian state, reeling from its war with Byzantium and paralyzed by a succession crisis that saw a revolving door of weak rulers, struggled to mount a coordinated defense. The decisive blow came at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah in 638 CE, a multi-day struggle that ended in the complete annihilation of the main imperial army and the death of its commander, Rustam Farrokhzad. This was more than a military loss, it was a psychological cataclysm. The invincible imperial army had been broken, and the road to the capital, Ctesiphon, lay open. The subsequent fall of the glittering metropolis, with its legendary wealth, signaled the end of the Sassanian Empire as a functioning superpower. The lost king, Yazdegerd III, became a fugitive in his own land, chased from province to province, a symbol of a collapsing world. The final stand at the Battle of Naharband in 642 CE, the victory of victories in Arab chronicles, extinguished the last vestiges of organized Sassanian military power. This political transformation replaced a divinely ordained hierarchical monarchy with a completely new system of governance under the authority of a caliph based in Arabia. The ancient Persian nobility was stripped of its power, its lands confiscated or subjected to new masters. The very concept of Iranshir, the sacred Iranian kingdom, was subsumed into the rapidly expanding Islamic Ummah. This was a total political revolution, erasing a 400-year-old dynasty and replacing it with a foreign rule that would forever alter the trajectory of Persian history, setting the stage for all subsequent transformations. Number 4. With the collapse of the Sassanian state came a fundamental change in the religious landscape, the second great transformation. For over a millennium, Zoroastrianism had been the spiritual bedrock of Iranian civilization, reaching its zenith as the state religion of the Sassanians. This ancient faith, with its dualistic cosmology of a cosmic struggle between Ahura Mazda, the wise lord of good, and Akraman, the spirit of evil, was inextricably woven into the fabric of Persian identity and governance. The king was the faith's protector, and the powerful priestly class, the Magi, wielded immense influence over law, education, and daily life. The conquest did not immediately lead to mass-forced conversions. Under the laws of the caliphate, Zoroastrians were initially granted the status of dhimmi, or protected people, allowing them to practice their religion in exchange for paying a special poll tax known as the jizya. However, this status also enshrined them as second-class citizens. They were subject to numerous social and legal restrictions. They could not build new fire temples, were often required to wear distinguishing clothing, and their testimony was not equal to a Muslim's in court. This created a powerful incentive for conversion, as embracing Islam meant social and economic equality, relief from the tax burden, and the opportunity for advancement within the new administration. Over centuries, a slow but steady process of Islamization took hold. The initial converts were often from the urban working classes and artisans, who may have felt alienated by the rigid Zoroastrian social structure. As the new faith took root, the old one began to decline. Fire temples were abandoned or converted into mosques, and the great corpus of Zoroastrian religious literature began to fade from common knowledge, preserved only by a dwindling priesthood. This religious shift was the most profound transformation of all, replacing an ancient indigenous faith with a new universalist religion, fundamentally altering the spiritual identity of the Iranian people and severing the direct link to their pre-Islamic past. Number 5. The third great transformation was the imposition of a new legal and administrative framework that supplanted the ancient laws of Persia. The Sassanian Empire had possessed a highly developed legal system based on Zoroastrian principles, administered by the Magi and royal courts. This entire structure was swept away and replaced by Islamic law, or Sharia. This was a monumental shift, as Sharia was derived from a completely different source, the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, and covered all aspects of life, from criminal justice and commercial contracts to family law and personal piety. The implementation of this new legal code fundamentally reordered society, introducing new concepts of justice, property rights, and social obligations. Initially, the Arab conquerors, lacking experience in governing a vast and complex empire, wisely chose to retain much of the Sassanian administrative apparatus. This marks one of the great ironies of the conquest. The new Islamic empire learned how to be an empire from its Persian predecessors. Sassanian systems of taxation, land management, the skarash, and the function of government ministries, diwans, were adopted wholesale. Persian bureaucrats and scribes, many of whom converted to Islam to retain their positions, became the indispensable administrators of the caliphate. For centuries, the machinery of the Islamic State was run by men whose professional heritage was Sassanian. While this created a degree of continuity, the ultimate authority was no longer the Shahanshah or the Zoroastrian priests, but the caliph and the Islamic scholars, ulama. The laws they administered were Islamic, even if the methods of collection and record-keeping were Persian. This transformation created a hybrid state, where a new Islamic legal and religious superstructure was built upon the enduring foundations of Sassanian administrative genius. This practical fusion would become a defining characteristic of Islamic civilization, particularly in its eastern domains. Number 6. The fourth transformation, unfolding over several centuries, was linguistic, a complex process of displacement, absorption, and rebirth. The official language of the Sassanian court and religion was Middle Persian, also known as Pahlavi. With the conquest, Arabic, the language of the Quran and the new rulers, became the language of government, high culture, and, most importantly, religion. For the first few centuries of Islamic rule, Arabic was the dominant literary and scientific language across Iran. Ambitious Iranians seeking a career in administration or scholarship had to master Arabic, and many of the greatest minds of the early Islamic Golden Age, though ethnically Persian, wrote their seminal works in Arabic. This period saw a massive influx of Arabic vocabulary into the Persian vernacular, particularly for religious, philosophical, and scientific concepts. It seemed as if Persian might suffer the same fate as other languages in the conquered territories, such as Coptic in Egypt or Aramaic in Syria, which were gradually relegated to liturgical or local use. However, the Persian language did not die. It retreated, absorbed, and transformed. Unlike other conquered peoples, the Iranians maintained their native tongue in daily life with remarkable tenacity. This linguistic resilience culminated in a great cultural revival starting in the 9th and 10th centuries. The result was New Persian, or Farsi, a language that retained its core Iranian grammar and structure, but was now written in the Arabic script and enriched by a vast Arabic lexicon. This new language became the vehicle for one of the world's most magnificent literary traditions, proving that while Iran's political and religious world had been conquered, its linguistic soul had survived, adapted, and was preparing to flourish anew. The triumph of New Persian ensured that Iranian identity would not be completely subsumed by Arab culture. Number 7. The fifth transformation involved a dramatic restructuring of society and the demolition of the rigid Sassanian social hierarchy. Pre-Islamic Persian society was built upon a caste system, theoretically immutable, that divided the populace into 4 main strata: the priests, Azranan; the warriors, Arteshdaran; the scribes dabiran, and the peasantry and artisans vestayoshan. Social mobility was severely restricted, and one's station in life was largely determined by birth. The arrival of Islam, with its radically egalitarian message that all believers were equal before God, regardless of race or lineage, acted as a powerful solvent on this ancient structure. The conquest shattered the power of the two highest castes, the Zoroastrian priesthood and the landed warrior aristocracy. Their privileges were abolished, their estates often confiscated, and their social prestige evaporated. For many in the lower castes, conversion to Islam offered a path to liberation from the hereditary constraints of the old system. An artisan or peasant who embraced the new faith could, in theory, achieve a status unattainable to their ancestors. However, a new social hierarchy soon emerged. In the early decades, Arab Muslims constituted a new ruling elite, often living in segregated garrison towns and enjoying the spoils of conquest. Non-Arab converts to Islam, known as Mawali, were initially treated as second-class citizens, required to be clients of an Arab tribe. This discrimination bred widespread resentment among the large and increasingly sophisticated Persian Mawali population, and was a major factor in the eventual overthrow of the Umayyad Caliphate by the Abbasids, a revolution that had strong Persian backing. Over time, as conversion became widespread and the distinctions between Arab and non-Arab Muslims blurred, a new, more fluid social order based on wealth, piety, and education replaced the rigid caste system of the past. Number 8. The sixth transformation was geographical and urban. The conquest shifted the center of political gravity within the Iranian world. The Sassanian capital, Ctesiphon, a sprawling metropolis on the Tigris, was largely abandoned after its capture. Its magnificent palaces left to fall into ruin, their bricks used for new constructions. The new Islamic Caliphate required a new capital, and in 762 CE, the Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur made a decision of immense historical significance. He founded the city of Baghdad, just a short distance upriver from the ruins of Ctesiphon. The choice was deeply symbolic and practical. It placed the heart of the new Islamic Empire squarely within the old Sassanian heartland of Mesopotamia, allowing the Abbasids to tap into the region's agricultural wealth and its deep well of administrative talent. Baghdad, the city of peace, was meticulously planned as a round city, an architectural statement of a new universal empire. For the next 500 years, it would be the largest and most intellectually vibrant city on earth, the epicenter of the Islamic Golden Age. The rise of Baghdad signaled a profound shift. While Damascus under the Umayyads had a distinctly Syro-Byzantine flavor, Baghdad under the Abbasids was overwhelmingly Persian in its culture, etiquette, and administrative style. The Abbasid court was in many ways a continuation of the Sassanian court, with powerful Persian families like the Barmakids serving as viziers and effectively running the empire. This transformation meant that while Iran had been conquered, its culture was now conquering its conquerors, as Persian civilization, reborn in an Islamic guise, came to define the high culture of the dominant world power from its new capital in the heart of the old empire. Number 9. The seventh transformation occurred in the realm of art and architecture, resulting in a brilliant synthesis of Sassanian forms and Islamic principles. Pre-Islamic Persian art was grand, monumental, and often focused on the glorification of the king. Sassanian palaces were adorned with colossal reliefs depicting royal triumphs and hunts, while their silverware and textiles featured royal portraits and Zoroastrian symbols. Islamic art, by contrast, was largely aniconic, meaning it avoided the depiction of human figures, especially in religious contexts. It favored geometric patterns, floral arabesques, and, above all, calligraphy, the beautiful rendering of the divine word of the Quran. The fusion of these two traditions created a new aesthetic that would define Islamic art for centuries. Sassanian architectural innovations became foundational elements of mosque and palace design across the Islamic world. The grand barrel vault known as the Iwani, a hallmark of Sassanian palaces, was adopted as a key feature of mosques, particularly in Iran and Central Asia. The Sassanian technique of placing a round dome over a square chamber using squinches was perfected and became a ubiquitous element of Islamic architecture. Sassanian decorative motifs such as the winged crown, the senmove, a mythical bird-dog hybrid, and stylized floral patterns were stripped of their Zoroastrian meaning and absorbed into the vocabulary of Islamic design, appearing on ceramics, textiles, and metalwork. This transformation was a process of creative adaptation. The new Islamic civilization did not simply erase Sassanian art, it reinterpreted it, taking its powerful forms and technical brilliance and repurposing them to serve the needs of a new faith and a new society. The result was a unique Perso-Islamic artistic tradition, visible in the stunning tile work of Isfahan and the intricate miniatures of Herat, a testament to the enduring power of the pre-Islamic artistic imagination. Number 10. The eighth transformation was the birth of the Islamic Golden Age, a period of unparalleled intellectual and scientific flourishing that was profoundly shaped by the legacy of Persian scholarship. The Arab conquerors, while possessing a powerful religious and literary tradition, did not have a deep heritage of philosophy, medicine, or empirical science. The lands of the Sassanian Empire, however, did. For centuries, Persia had been a crossroads of knowledge, absorbing influences from Greece. India had its own ancient traditions. The Great Sassanian Academy at Gundishapur, for example, was a center for the study of medicine, astronomy, and philosophy, where scholars from different cultures worked and taught. After the conquest, the Abbasid caliphs, particularly patrons like Harun al-Rashid and al-Mamun, initiated a vast translation movement centered in Baghdad's House of Wisdom. Their goal was to translate all the known scientific and philosophical knowledge of the world into Arabic. While many texts were translated from Greek, a huge corpus of knowledge was also translated from Middle Persian Pahlavi, bringing Sassanian science and Indian mathematics into the Arabic-speaking world. Crucially, many of the leading scholars who drove this golden age were ethnically Persian. Men like Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, the father of algebra, whose work introduced Hindu-Arabic numerals and algebraic concepts to the world, was a Persian scholar. Physicians like Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi and philosophers like Ibn Sina, Avicenna, whose works would be standard medical and philosophical texts in Europe for centuries, were all products of this Perso-Islamic intellectual environment. This transformation saw the scientific and philosophical heritage of Sassanian Persia become a foundational pillar of a new global scientific culture, transmitted through the Arabic language and enriching the entire world. Number 11. The ninth transformation was the gradual but profound shift in Iran's Islamic identity from predominantly Sunni to overwhelmingly Shia. For the first 9 centuries after the conquest, the majority of Iranians who converted to Islam adopted the Sunni branch of the faith, which was the creed of the ruling caliphates. Shiism, which holds that leadership of the Muslim community should have remained with the descendants of the Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law, Ali, existed as a minority, often associated with political dissent and quietist piety. While some early Iranian dynasties had Shia sympathies, The wholesale transformation of Iran into a Shia stronghold did not occur until the 16th century with the rise of the Safavid dynasty. The Safavids, who began as a Sufi order, embraced a militant form of Twelver Shi'ism, and upon conquering Iran in 5001, declared it the official state religion. This was a political act of immense consequence, designed to forge a unique Iranian identity distinct from their powerful Sunni neighbors, the Ottoman Empire to the west and the Uzbeks to the east. Shah Ismail I and his successors initiated a ruthless and systematic campaign of forced conversion. Sunni mosques were destroyed or converted. Sunni clerics were executed or forced to flee, and Shia scholars were imported from Arab lands to establish a new religious hierarchy. State-sponsored rituals, such as the mourning ceremonies for the martyred Imam Hussein during Muharram, were promoted to embed Shia identity deep within the popular culture. By the mid-17th century, the process was largely complete, and Iran had become the bastion of Shia Islam that it remains today. This transformation, though occurring long after the initial conquest, was one of its most significant long-term consequences, giving Iran a distinct religious identity within the Islamic world that continues to shape its politics and culture. Number 12. The 10th transformation was the rise of a new literary tradition, culminating in the creation of a national epic that preserved the memory of pre-Islamic Iran. For centuries after the conquest, literary production in Iran was dominated by Arabic poetry and prose. Yet, the Persian language, now reborn as New Persian, was poised for a renaissance. This movement, often called the Shu'ubiyah, was an intellectual current that asserted the cultural and artistic superiority of the Persians over the Arabs, even while remaining within the framework of Islam. The revival reached its zenith under the patronage of native Persian dynasties like the Sassanids in the 10th century, who actively promoted the use of Persian as a literary language. The crowning achievement of this era was the Shahnameh, or the Book of Kings, an epic poem of some 50,000 couplets composed by the poet Ferdowsi around the year 1010 CE. The Shahnameh was a monumental undertaking, a chronicle of the myths, legends, and history of Iran from the creation of the world to the Arab conquest. In writing his epic, Ferdowsi made a conscious effort to use a pure form of Persian with minimal Arabic loanwords, effectively creating a vast repository of the native lexicon. The poem was more than just literature. It was an act of cultural preservation, a grand narrative that gave the Iranian people a continuous history and a distinct identity that predated the arrival of Islam. It celebrated the heroes and kings of ancient Persia, their triumphs and tragedies, and ended on the somber note of the conquest, framing it as a national tragedy. The Shahnameh became the foundational text of Persian literary culture, ensuring that even after centuries of Islamic rule, the memory of the ancient world would never be erased. It was a declaration that Iran had been transformed but not annihilated. Number 13. The 11th transformation involved the absorption and evolution of Persian political theory within an Islamic framework. The Sassanian concept of kingship was based on the idea of the Shahanshah, King of Kings, possessing a divine radiance or glory, the Esk Varena. The king was an absolute monarch, the central pillar of the state, whose justice maintained cosmic order. The early Islamic Caliphate, in contrast, was theoretically a religious community led by a successor to the Prophet, whose authority was based on piety and adherence to God's law. However, as the Caliphate evolved from a community of believers into a vast, multicultural empire, its rulers began to adopt the trappings and theories of the imperial systems they had replaced, particularly the Persian one. The Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad modeled their court ceremonies, their elaborate etiquette, and their hierarchical bureaucracy directly on Sassanian precedents. More importantly, Persian political thought, codified in Mirrors for Princes literature, was translated into Arabic and became highly influential. These works advised rulers on the art of statecraft, emphasizing justice, wisdom, and the necessity of a strong, centralized authority to prevent chaos. The Sassanian model of an absolute, majestic, and distant monarch became the de facto ideal for Islamic sultans and emperors for centuries. This led to a profound transformation in the nature of Islamic governance, moving it away from the early, more egalitarian model toward a system that was, in practice, a continuation of ancient Near Eastern despotism, albeit justified in Islamic terms. The Persian idea that the king was the shadow of God on earth was seamlessly integrated into Islamic political culture, demonstrating how the conquered civilization provided the very framework for how the conquerors would rule. Number 14. The 12th transformation was the Islamization of Persian cultural traditions and festivals. Before the conquest, the Iranian calendar was filled with Zoroastrian festivals celebrating the seasons and key moments in their cosmology. The most important of these was Nowruz, the spring equinox, which marked the new year and symbolized the triumph of light and life over the darkness of winter. Initially, the new Arab rulers suppressed many of these pagan celebrations. However, their roots in the culture were too deep to be eradicated. Instead of disappearing, these traditions were gradually adapted and given an Islamic veneer. Nowruz, for instance, survived and flourished. While stripped of its explicit Zoroastrian theological meaning, it was embraced by various Islamic dynasties in Iran as a cultural rather than a religious holiday. It became associated with the coronation of kings and the collection of taxes, and its themes of renewal and rebirth were easily harmonized with Islamic spirituality. Other, smaller festivals were either abandoned or absorbed into local Islamic Saints' Day celebrations. This process of cultural syncretism was a two-way street. Just as Persian traditions were Islamized, Islam in Persia took on a distinctly Persian cultural flavor. The art, poetry, and mysticism that developed in Iran were different from those in the Arab heartlands. This created a unique Perso-Islamic civilization, a rich tapestry where the threads of the ancient past were not cut but were rewoven into a new and vibrant pattern. This enduring synthesis is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the transformation, showing how a culture can maintain its essence even while adopting a new religious identity. Number 15. The 13th transformation can be seen in the very soil of the land, a change in agricultural and economic systems. The Sassanian Empire's prosperity was built on the incredible fertility of the Mesopotamian plains, sustained by a complex and ancient system of irrigation canals. The state invested heavily in this infrastructure, and the rural economy was organized around a class of landed gentry, the Dehakwans, who served as local administrators and tax collectors. The initial conquest and subsequent decades of instability caused significant disruption to the system. Canals fell into disrepair, and agricultural output declined in some areas. However, the new Islamic administration soon recognized the importance of this agricultural base and began to reinvest in and expand the irrigation networks. They also introduced new crops from other parts of their vast empire, such as sugarcane, rice, and cotton, which diversified the region's agricultural output. The system of land ownership also underwent a major transformation. Large Sassanian crown lands and the estates of the Zoroastrian temples and exiled nobility became the property of the Islamic State. These lands were often granted as fiefs, aikita, to soldiers and officials, creating a new landed elite. The Degquans, the old Persian gentry, were initially squeezed between the new Arab lords and the peasantry. Many converted to Islam and integrated into the new system, while others lost their lands and influence. This economic and agrarian shift fundamentally altered the rural power structure that had existed for centuries, laying the economic groundwork for a new medieval society and redirecting the vast agricultural surplus of Iran and Iraq towards the new capitals and cities of the Islamic Caliphate. Number 16. The 14th transformation was the rise of Sufism, or Islamic mysticism, which found particularly fertile ground in the Persian cultural sphere. While Sufism has its roots in the ascetic practices of early Muslims across the empire, its development into a sophisticated philosophical and poetic tradition owes a tremendous debt to Iranian thinkers and sensibilities. Pre-Islamic Iran had its own traditions of mysticism and Gnostic thought, elements of which may have resonated with the new Islamic mystical currents. The Persian soul, steeped in a literature of allegory and symbolism, seemed uniquely suited to express the Sufi quest for a direct, experiential knowledge of God. As a result, many of the most foundational figures in the history of Sufism were Persian. Mystics like Bayezid Bastami and Mansur al-Hallaj pushed the boundaries of orthodox Islamic thought with their ecstatic expressions of divine union. It was in the Persian language that Sufi poetry reached its most sublime heights. Poets like Rumi, Hafiz, and Saudi used the language of worldly love, wine, and intoxication as metaphors for the soul's yearning for the divine. Their work transformed Sufism from a practice of asceticism into a rich popular literary and spiritual movement. This flourishing of mystical thought represented a profound transformation of Islamic spirituality itself. It offered a more personal, emotional, and inward path to God that contrasted with the legalistic and doctrinal focus of the Orthodox clergy. This Persian-inflected mysticism would become one of Iran's greatest cultural exports, spreading throughout the Islamic world from the Ottoman Empire to Mughal India and shaping the spiritual lives of millions. Number 17. The 15th transformation was the complete reorientation of Iran's geopolitical and cultural worldview. For 1,000 years, from the Achaemenids to the Sassanians, Persia's primary orientation was westward. Its great rival was the Hellenic world. First the Greeks, then the Seleucids, and finally the Romans and Byzantines. This centuries-long struggle defined its military, its diplomacy, and its sense of self. The Sassanian Empire saw itself as the equal and opposite of Rome, one of the two eyes of the world. The Islamic conquest shattered this paradigm. Iran was no longer an independent pole of world power, but an integral part of a vast, new civilization, the Eight Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, whose spiritual center was in Mecca and whose political center was, for a time, in Damascus and later in Baghdad. Its new frontiers were not with Byzantium in the west, but with the Turkic peoples of Central Asia in the northeast and the Hindu kingdoms of India to the southeast. This shift had profound consequences. Iran became the eastern frontier of the Islamic heartland, a gateway through which Islamic civilization would spread into Central Asia and beyond. Iranian soldiers, administrators, and missionaries played a key role in this expansion. The cultural flow was also redirected. Instead of a tense exchange with the Greco-Roman world, Iran was now in a dynamic relationship with the Arab heartland and the Turkic and Indic worlds. This geopolitical recentering was a fundamental change, embedding Iran within a new civilizational context and defining its relationship with its neighbors in a way that continues to this day. The old East-West rivalry that had defined antiquity was over. A new Islamicate world order had taken its place. Number 18, the 16th transformation was the physical alteration of the landscape through the establishment of new cities and the decline of old ones. The conquest brought about a significant demographic shift. Arab tribesmen, who formed the backbone of the conquering armies, were settled in newly established garrison cities, Wamsa, such as Kufa and Basra in Mesopotamia. These cities were strategically located to control the conquered territories and serve as bases for further expansion. While some old Sassanian cities like Isfahan and Ray continued to thrive and grow, many others, particularly those associated with the old Zoroastrian faith or Sassanian royal power, fell into decline. Istakhur, the ancestral home of the Sassanian dynasty and a major religious center, was repeatedly ravaged after rebellions and eventually faded into obscurity. The focus of urban development shifted to centers of Islamic administration and commerce. Over time, the quintessential Iranian city evolved. Its heart was no longer the fire temple and the royal palace, but the Fide Mosque, Jama, and the bustling marketplace, Bazaar. The very layout of cities began to reflect the new social and religious order, with neighborhoods often segregated by religion or craft, and a clear distinction between the public, male-dominated spaces of the mosque and bazaar and the private, secluded spaces of the home. This architectural and urban transformation was a physical manifestation of the cultural changes sweeping the land. It was a tangible representation of the new Perso-Islamic society, a world built upon the foundations of the old but designed according to the blueprints of the new faith. The ruins of Sassanian cities became a silent testament to a lost world, while the vibrant new Islamic cities became the crucibles in which a new Iranian identity was forged. Number 119. The 17th transformation was the change in the medium and content of historical memory. The Sassanians, like the Achaemenids before them, had a strong sense of their place in history, which they recorded in royal inscriptions, official chronicles like the Aqwadai Namag, and oral traditions. This was a history centered on the reigns of kings, their wars, and their divine right to rule. With the conquest, this tradition was broken. The art of writing in the difficult Pahlavi script declined, and the official chronicles of the fallen empire were lost or neglected. History writing was taken over by a new class of scholars working under the patronage of the Caliphate and writing in Arabic. Their perspective was radically different. For them, history did not begin with the first Persian king, but with the creation of the world as described in the Quran, followed by the lives of the prophets, culminating in the career of the Prophet Muhammad and the glorious conquests of his successors. In this new universal history, the pre-Islamic Persian kings were often depicted as pagan tyrants, their empire a prelude to the coming of Islam. This represented a deliberate reshaping of the past to fit the worldview of the conquerors. However, just as the Persian language survived, so too did its historical memory. Persian scholars working in Arabic, like Al-Tabari, meticulously collected and preserved much of the old Sassanian historical material, integrating it into their grand Islamic chronicles. This preserved data would later be used by poets like Ferdowsi to reconstruct the pre-Islamic past in the Shahnameh. This transformation thus created a dual historical consciousness in Iran, a pride in the glories of its ancient pre-Islamic past, coexisting with an identity as a key player in the sacred history of Islam. Number 20. The 18th transformation was the evolution of a distinct Persian military tradition within the broader Islamic armed forces. The Sassanian army had been a formidable machine, its strength lying in its heavy armored cavalry. This force was shattered at Qadisiyah and Nahawand. In the early decades of the Caliphate, the armies were dominated by Arab tribal levies. However, as the empire expanded and settled, the caliphs needed to create a professional, standing army. They turned to the peoples of their eastern provinces, particularly the Persians of Khorasan. Khorasan had a long and proud martial tradition, and its soldiers were renowned for their skill and loyalty. It was these Khorasani troops who formed the backbone of the Abbasid revolution that overthrew the Umayyads in 750 CE. Under the Abbasids, Persian soldiers and commanders became a dominant force in the caliphal army. They brought with them elements of Sassanian military organization, tactics, and even insignia. The ideal of the mounted warrior aristocrat, central to the Sassanian ethos, was reborn in the Islamic Ghulam system, where elite slave soldiers, often of Turkic or Iranian origin, were trained as heavy cavalry. This military transformation meant that while Iran was ruled by a caliph, the military power that upheld his throne was increasingly Iranian and Turkic. This shift had enormous political consequences. Persian and later Turkic military commanders became the true power behind the throne in Baghdad, appointing and deposing caliphs at will. This eventually led to the political fragmentation of the caliphate, as powerful military governors established their own semi-independent dynasties in Iran and Central Asia, a direct, if unforeseen, consequence of the empire's reliance on the martial traditions of the people it had conquered. Number 21. The 19th transformation, subtle but pervasive, was the integration of Persian folklore and mythology into the broader narrative tapestry of Islamic culture. Before Islam, Iran possessed a vast and ancient body of myths and legends, populated by heroic kings, monstrous demons, divstri, and magical creatures like the Submerge. These tales, which formed the basis of the Zoroastrian oral tradition, were central to the Persian worldview. While the official religion was suppressed, these stories proved remarkably resilient. They survived in the popular imagination and were retold by storytellers in bazaars and courts. As Persians converted to Islam, they did not simply abandon their ancestral tales. Instead, they began to weave them into an Islamic context. Pre-Islamic heroes and kings were sometimes reimagined as righteous monotheists or even prophets who lived before the time of Muhammad. The mythical geography of the Avesta was sometimes conflated with the sacred geography of the Quran. This process of syncretism enriched the literary and popular culture of the entire Islamic world. Persian tales, such as those that would eventually be collected in 1001 Nights, found their way into the Arabic-speaking world and beyond, carrying with them the themes and archetypes of ancient Iran. The result was a cultural landscape where stories of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba could coexist with tales of Rostam and his heroic horse Raksh. This blending of narrative traditions demonstrated the power of storytelling to preserve cultural memory. While the grand theological and political structures of Sassanian Iran were dismantled, its imaginative world, its myths, legends, and folk heroes endured, becoming a permanent and vibrant part of the new civilization's cultural DNA, ensuring that the voice of ancient Persia would continue to speak through the ages. Number 22. The 20th transformation concerned the status and role of women in society. Sassanian society, particularly among the elite, was highly patriarchal. Marriages were often arranged for political and economic reasons, and the concept of lineage was paramount. Zoroastrian law contained detailed regulations regarding marriage, divorce, and inheritance, but women's public roles were limited. The arrival of Islam introduced a new set of legal and social norms regarding women based on the Quran and Islamic jurisprudence. In some respects, early Islamic law offered women explicit rights that were an improvement over some existing tribal or local customs. It granted women the right to own and inherit property, to consent to marriage, and to initiate divorce under certain circumstances. However, the Islamization of Iran also led to the widespread adoption of practices like veiling and the seclusion of women, particularly in urban upper-class settings. The concept of the harem, a secluded women's quarter in the household, while having pre-Islamic precedents in both Byzantine and Persian court life, became more formalized and widespread under Islamic rule. The transformation was therefore complex and cannot be characterized as simple liberation or oppression. What is clear is that the legal and social framework governing women's lives was fundamentally changed. Their rights and responsibilities were now defined by Islamic law rather than Zoroastrian tradition, and their social world, especially among the elite, became increasingly centered on the private sphere of the home. This shift would have a lasting impact on the social fabric of Iran, creating the patriarchal structures that would characterize the society for centuries to come. Number 23. The 21st transformation was the redefinition of Iran's commercial and trade relationships. The Sassanian Empire was a linchpin of the global trade of late antiquity, controlling the western end of the Silk Road and the lucrative trade routes that ran through the Persian Gulf to India and beyond. Its merchants traded in silk, spices, precious metals, and other luxury goods, and its coinage was a stable and recognized currency across Asia. The conquest incorporated Iran into a new and even larger economic zone, the Islamic Caliphate, which at its height stretched from Spain to the borders of China. This created a vast, unified market with a common legal framework and, for a time, a common language of commerce, Arabic. Initially, the conquests caused disruption, but they soon led to an unprecedented boom in trade and commerce. Persian merchants, now part of this vast network, played a leading role. They established trading colonies along the Silk Road and across the Indian Ocean, reaching as far as China and Southeast Asia. The introduction of new financial instruments developed by Muslim merchants, such as the Bill of Exchange, Succa, and new forms of partnership, further stimulated this commercial expansion. This economic transformation shifted Iran's role from being an imperial competitor on the world stage to being a vital commercial and manufacturing hub within a larger Islamic world system. Cities like Isfahan, Shiraz, and Nishapur became major centers of production for textiles, carpets, ceramics, and metalwork, their goods traded across the entire hemisphere. The wealth generated by this commercial activity fueled the cultural and scientific achievements of the age and solidified Iran's position as a key economic player in the medieval world. Number 24. The 22nd transformation was the fundamental change in the institution of education. In the Sassanian Empire, education was largely the preserve of the elite and was controlled by the Zoroastrian priesthood. Its primary purpose was to train priests, scribes, and bureaucrats to serve the state and the temple. The curriculum focused on religious texts, law, history, and the complex Pahlavi script. The arrival of Islam democratized education to a certain extent. At the heart of the new educational system was the Quran. Since every Muslim was expected to read and understand the Holy Book, there was a new emphasis on literacy. Basic education began in the Maktab, or Quranic school, which was often attached to a mosque and was open to boys from a wider range of social backgrounds. For higher education, a new institution emerged, the madrasa. While Iran had pre-Islamic centers of learning like Gundishapur, the madrasa was a new type of college focused on Islamic sciences, such as Quranic exegesis, hadith, traditions of the Prophet, and Sharia law. They also often taught secular subjects like medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. The establishment of madrasas throughout Iran, funded by pious endowments, waqf, created a network of higher learning that produced the scholars, judges, and theologians who would lead the new society. This transformation replaced an exclusive, state-controlled educational system with a more widespread, religion-centered one, which nonetheless became the crucible for the great intellectual achievements of the Islamic Golden Age and shaped the intellectual life of Iran for a millennium. Number 25. The 23rd transformation was the alteration of the musical and poetic arts. Sassanian court culture was renowned for its sophisticated music, with legendary minstrels like Barbade, who were masters of complex melodic systems. This music was primarily secular, designed for royal entertainment and epic recitation. The early Islamic period brought a degree of ambivalence and sometimes outright hostility towards music from stricter religious authorities who associated it with vice and decadence. However, the deeply ingrained musical traditions of Persia could not be suppressed. Instead, they were transformed and adapted. Persian musical theory and practice were absorbed by Arab musicians and became a foundational element of what is now known as classical Arab music. Within Iran itself, music found new expression in different contexts. A rich tradition of Sufi devotional music developed, using song and rhythm as a means of achieving spiritual ecstasy. The recitation of the Shahnameh and other epic poems continued as a popular form of entertainment, preserving ancient melodic modes. In poetry, the conquest brought the Arabic poetic tradition with its rigid meters and the Qasida ode form to Iran. For a time, it overshadowed native forms. But soon, Persian poets began to master the Arabic forms and then adapt them to the unique genius of the Persian language. They also developed new forms, such as the Rubai quatrain, famously used by Omar Khayyam, and the Ghazali, a lyric poem of love and longing perfected by Hafiz. This poetic transformation saw Persian literature absorb foreign forms, master them, and then create a new classical tradition that was unmistakably its own, a powerful testament to the creative resilience of its culture. Number 26. The 24th transformation was the rise of a new class of intellectuals, the ulama, who replaced the Zoroastrian magi as the moral and spiritual guides of society. The magi had been a hereditary priestly caste. Their authority derived from their lineage and their role as interpreters of the Avesta and guardians of the sacred fires. The Sulama, by contrast, were a meritocracy of scholars. Their authority came not from birth, but from their deep knowledge of the Islamic religious sciences, the Quran, the Hadith, and the vast body of Islamic law. Any Muslim man could, in theory, become an alimix, a learned one, through study and dedication. This new class of religious scholars, many of whom were of Persian origin, came to wield immense power and influence. They served as judges, quadis, in the courts, as teachers in the madrasas, and as prayer leaders or imams in the mosques. They were the arbiters of religious orthodoxy and the primary interpreters of God's will for the community. Their collective opinions and legal rulings shaped the development of society in profound ways. The replacement of the hereditary magi with the scholarly ulama represented a fundamental shift in the basis of religious authority, from inherited privilege to acquired knowledge. This new intellectual elite would come to define the religious and social life of Iran, and the tension between their authority and that of the political rulers, the sultans and shahs, would become a central theme in Iranian history for the next 1400 years. Number 27. The 25th transformation involved the introduction of a new conception of time and history, rooted in a new calendar. The Sassanian state used a Zoroastrian solar calendar with 12 months of 30 days each, plus 5 extra days at the end of the year. The calendar was intimately linked to the cycle of agricultural seasons and Zoroastrian festivals. The Islamic conquest introduced the lunar Hijri calendar, whose starting point is the Prophet Muhammad's migration, Hijrah, from Mecca to Medina in 622 CE. A lunar calendar is about 11 days shorter than a solar one, meaning that its months drift through the seasons over a 33-year cycle. This was a profound change. The Islamic calendar was untethered from the natural agricultural rhythms that had governed life in Iran for millennia. Key religious events such as the fasting month of Ramadan and the Hajj pilgrimage would now occur at different times of the year, sometimes in the dead of winter, sometimes in the blistering heat of summer. This calendrical shift symbolically detached the community from its pre-Islamic, nature-based conception of time and re-anchored it in the sacred history of Islam. While solar calendars for agricultural and administrative purposes were eventually reintroduced in Iran, the Hijri calendar remained the ultimate arbiter of religious and historical time. This transformation served as a constant, subtle reminder that the community's primary identity was now defined not by the land and its seasons, but by its membership in the global Islamic Ummah and its shared historical experience. Number 28. The 26th transformation was the development of a distinctively Iranian form of Islamic philosophy, a discipline known as falsafa. While the translation movement in Baghdad had brought Greek philosophy, particularly the works of Aristotle and Plato, into the Islamic world, it was often Persian thinkers who became its most profound interpreters and innovators. Philosophers like Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina Avicenna, while writing in Arabic, were products of the Iranian intellectual world. They undertook the monumental task of harmonizing the rationalism of Greek philosophy with the monotheistic teachings of Islam. Their work was not simply imitation. They built sophisticated philosophical systems that dealt with metaphysics, logic, ethics, and political science, creating a rich and powerful intellectual tradition. Later, this tradition evolved into what is known as the School of Illumination, Khidmat al-Ishraq, founded by the Persian philosopher Hurawardi. This school blended the rationalism of Aristotle with the mystical spiritualist traditions of ancient Persia and Neoplatonism, arguing that ultimate knowledge could be achieved not just through logic, but through mystical intuition and spiritual illumination. This transformation represented the creation of a new intellectual synthesis. It took the heritage of ancient Greece, the revelations of Islam, and the mystical sensibilities of ancient Iran and wove them together. This Persian philosophical tradition would have a profound influence not only on the Islamic world, but also on medieval Jewish and Christian thought, and it remains a vibrant intellectual current in Iran to this day. It stands as a powerful example of how the conquered civilization did not just absorb new ideas, but actively shaped and redirected them into entirely new channels of thought. Number 29, the 27th transformation can be characterized as a shift in the very concept of identity. For a Sassanian, identity was a matter of lineage, religion, and allegiance to the Shahanshah. To be Iranian was to be a subject of Iran Shah, and a follower of the Zoroastrian faith. The conquest introduced a powerful new layer of identity, membership in the Ummah, the global community of Muslim believers. For the first time, a Persian in Isfahan shared a core identity with an Arab in Damascus and a Berber in North Africa. This was a transnational, universalist identity based on shared faith, a shared sacred text, and a shared body of law. This did not, however, erase the older, distinctly Persian identity. Instead, it created a complex, multi-layered sense of self that has been a defining feature of Iranian history ever since. The result was a Perso-Islamic identity. Iranians became Muslims, but they remained proud of their language, their culture, and their pre-Islamic history. This duality is perfectly captured in the work of Ferdowsi, a devout Muslim who dedicated his life to chronicling the glories of the pre-Islamic Shahs. This transformation created a creative tension between the universalist claims of Islam and the particularist pride of Persian culture. It was out of this tension that much of the brilliance of Persian civilization in the Islamic era was born. Iran was no longer a world unto itself, but it had carved out a unique and influential position as a distinct cultural zone within the larger world of Islam, a civilization within a civilization. Number 30. The 28th transformation was the complete overhaul of the material culture of daily life. The Arab conquest introduced new customs, foods, and styles of dress that gradually blended with or replaced older Persian ones. The simple, austere lifestyle of the early Arab conquerors stood in stark contrast to the luxurious and highly stratified world of Sassanian Persia. While the elites of the Caliphate soon adopted Sassanian luxury for the general populace, the changes were more subtle but equally profound. New crops introduced by the Arabs, as mentioned earlier, changed the local diet. The strictures of Islamic dietary law, halal, also altered culinary practices. In clothing, while local styles often persisted, the turban, which had a long history in the region but was popularized by the Arabs, became a common form of male headwear. The practice of veiling for women became more widespread and standardized under Islamic social norms. In domestic architecture, the design of homes began to change to reflect Islamic values of privacy and modesty, with a greater emphasis on secluded courtyards and separate quarters for men and women. Even the furnishings of the home changed, with the widespread use of carpets for prayer and sitting on the floor becoming more common, a practice that blended nomadic Arab custom with the rich Persian tradition of weaving. These transformations in the mundane details of everyday life, what people ate, what they wore, how their homes were built, cumulatively created a new social reality. They were the tangible daily manifestations of the deeper religious and cultural shifts that were remaking Iranian society from the ground up. Number 31. The 29th transformation was the absorption and redirection of the Persian bureaucratic class. The Sassanian state was run by a highly educated and influential class of scribes and administrators, the Daviran. This group was the repository of centuries of administrative knowledge and tradition. After the conquest, the Arab rulers, unfamiliar with the complexities of imperial administration, found this class to be indispensable. In the early years, Christian Arameans and Zoroastrian Persians continued to run the day-to-day business of government, keeping records in Middle Persian and Greek. However, as the Caliphate consolidated its power, there was a drive to Arabize the administration. Under the Umayyads, Arabic was made the official language of the state, and the Persian Dabirana were forced to adapt. Many converted to Islam and mastered Arabic, translating their Sassanian administrative knowledge into the new language and system. Under the Abbasids, this transformed class of Persian bureaucrats reached the zenith of their power. Families of Persian origin, like the aforementioned Barmakids, became hereditary viziers, effectively holding more power than the caliphs they served. They were no longer just scribes, they were kingmakers, patrons of the arts and sciences, and the chief architects of Abbasid state policy. This transformation ensured the survival and transmission of Sassanian statecraft. It created a new Perso-Arab administrative elite that blended the imperial traditions of ancient Iran with the unifying framework of the new Islamic state. The legacy of this class is that the administrative DNA of the great Islamic empires was, to a very large extent, Persian. Number 32. The 30th transformation was the change in the relationship between the state and the land. In the Sassanian system, the concept of land ownership was complex, with a mixture of state lands, private estates held by the nobility, and communal village lands. The ultimate owner of the realm was the Shahanshah. The conquest introduced the Islamic concept of land tenure, which categorized land based on how it was acquired. Lands taken by force became face, the property of the Muslim community as a whole, to be administered by the state. The revenue from this land, the kharash, was a primary source of income for the caliphate. This represented a massive nationalization of the most productive agricultural lands in the empire. The state, now the largest landowner, had immense power to shape the economy. It used land grants, the iktak system, to pay soldiers and officials, which had the long-term effect of creating a new military aristocracy that was often disconnected from the land it controlled. This system differed from true feudalism in that the grants were typically not hereditary and did not confer administrative jurisdiction. However, it fundamentally altered the relationship between the tiller of the soil and the recipient of its surplus. The old Deccan gentry, who had deep local roots and a paternalistic relationship with their peasants, were gradually replaced by a more detached class of state-appointed landholders. This transformation centralized economic power in the hands of the state and its military elite and created a new set of economic relationships that would characterize medieval Iran. Number 33. The 31st transformation was the introduction of a new sacred geography that was superimposed upon the ancient landscape of Iran. For Zoroastrians, the land itself was sacred, dotted with holy mountains, rivers, and, most importantly, the fire temples that housed the sacred flame of Ahura Mazda. The conquest desecrated this sacred landscape. Many fire temples were destroyed or converted into mosques, their sacred fires extinguished. In their place, Islam introduced a new set of holy places and pilgrimage routes. The ultimate center of this new geography was, of course, Mecca, a distant city in the Arabian desert to which all Muslims were required to pray and, if able, make a pilgrimage. Within Iran itself, a new sacred map began to take shape. Cities like Qom and Mashhad became major centers of Shia pilgrimage after the tombs of revered Shia figures. An imam's sister and an imam, respectively, were established there. The graves of saints, Sufi mystics, and scholars became local shrines visited by the faithful seeking blessings and intercession. This transformation reconsecrated the Iranian landscape according to an Islamic narrative. The ancient holiness of the land, tied to Zoroastrian cosmology, was replaced by a new holiness tied to the history of Islam and the lives of its saints and martyrs. This process helped to embed the new faith deep into the physical and psychological world of the people, making the land itself a testament to the triumph of the new religion, even as the mountains and rivers retained their ancient pre-Islamic resonance in folklore and poetry. Number 34. The 32nd transformation was the revolution in scientific methodology and institutions. While Sassanian Persia had a rich tradition of scholarship, particularly in astronomy and medicine, the scientific enterprise was not institutionalized in the same way it would become under Islam. The Islamic conquest and the subsequent establishment of centers like Baghdad created a new environment for scientific inquiry. The introduction of paper from China via Persian Central Asia in the 8th century was a crucial technological catalyst, making books cheaper and more widely available than papyrus or parchment had ever been. This fueled an explosion of knowledge. New institutions emerged, such as large, state-sponsored observatories equipped with sophisticated instruments which allowed astronomers of Persian origin, like Al-Biruni, to make incredibly precise measurements of the heavens. Hospitals, Bimaristan, which often doubled as medical schools, were established in major cities, building on the model of places like Gandhishapur, but expanding them significantly. These were not just places to care for the sick, but centers for medical research and education. Thinkers like Al-Razi championed clinical observation and experimentation, introducing a more empirical approach to medicine. This transformation created a new scientific ecosystem. It was cross-cultural, drawing on Greek, Indian, and Persian sources. It was well-funded by state patrons, and it was increasingly based on observation and verification. The Persian scholars who were at the heart of this movement were not just preserving ancient knowledge. They were creating a new scientific methodology that was one of the glories of the Islamic Golden Age. Number 35. The 33rd transformation was the development and codification of the Persian language itself, a process directly spurred by the encounter with Arabic. The Arabic language, as the vehicle of divine revelation, was the subject of intense grammatical study from the earliest days of Islam. The first comprehensive grammar of Arabic, the East Kitab of Sibawayh, was in fact written by a Persian. This rigorous analytical approach to language was then applied to Persian. As Persian re-emerged as a literary language, scholars and poets began to standardize its grammar, refine its vocabulary, and establish its literary norms, often using the framework of Arabic philology. The creation of the Shahnameh was a key moment in this process, providing a massive and authoritative corpus for the language. Another crucial development was the compilation of the first major Persian dictionaries, which cataloged the language's vast vocabulary, including its ancient pre-Islamic words, and explained their meanings, often with reference to poetic usage. This transformation turned a vernacular tongue into a standardized, classical literary language capable of expressing the highest levels of poetry, philosophy, and history. The encounter with the highly systematized structure of classical Arabic forced Persian writers to become more self-conscious about their own linguistic heritage, leading them to preserve and codify it with a rigor it might not otherwise have had. This ensured that Farsi would not only survive, but thrive as one of the world's great languages. Number 34th transformation involved a profound shift in eschatology, the understanding of death, judgment, and the afterlife. Zoroastrianism had a sophisticated eschatology, including concepts of a heavenly paradise, a hellish abyss, a final judgment, and a future savior who would bring about the final renovation of the world. While there are striking parallels with Islamic eschatology, the specifics and the emphasis were different. Islam introduced a powerful and vivid vision of the last day, Yama al-Qiyamah, the resurrection of the body, and a final inescapable judgment by God, leading to an eternity in either heaven, Jannah, or hell, Jahannam. This vision, described in detail in the Quran, became a central and powerful element of the popular religious imagination in Iran. The Quranic descriptions of the sensual delights of paradise and the terrifying torments of hell became dominant themes in art, literature, and religious preaching. The concept of the soul's journey after death was also transformed. While Zoroastrianism had the idea of the Chinvat bridge which the soul had to cross, Islam introduced the figures of the angels Munkar and Nakir, who interrogate the deceased in the grave. This new eschatological framework had a profound impact on ethics and daily life. The constant awareness of a final personal accounting before God served as a powerful motivator for pious and moral behavior. It reoriented the ultimate focus of life from maintaining cosmic order in this world, a key Zoroastrian theme, to achieving personal salvation in the next, a subtle but significant shift in the spiritual center of gravity for the entire civilization. Number 37. The 37th transformation was the complete rewriting of Iran's relationship with the Indian subcontinent. Under the Sassanians, relations with India were primarily based on trade and occasional military rivalry. There was a healthy exchange of cultural and scientific ideas. The game of chess, for example, traveled from India to Persia during this period. The Islamic conquest of Iran fundamentally changed this dynamic. Iran now became the primary conduit through which Islamic civilization reached India. Starting in the late 10th and early 11th centuries, a series of Turkic and Afghan dynasties, heavily Persianized in their culture and administration, began to launch invasions from bases in what are now Afghanistan and eastern Iran into northern India. These conquests eventually led to the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate and, later, the Mughal Empire, which would rule India for centuries. These empires, while militarily Turkic and religiously Muslim, were culturally and administratively Persian. Farsi became the official court language of Muslim India, and Persian art, architecture, poetry, and political thought became the dominant cultural forms among the ruling elite. This transformation turned Iran from being a neighbor of India to being the cultural parent of a new Indo-Islamic civilization. The result was a remarkable fusion of cultures, seen in the magnificent architecture of the Taj Mahal, the development of the Urdu language, a blend of a local Indian dialect with Persian and Arabic vocabulary, and the rich tradition of Indian Sufism. Iran was no longer just trading with India. It was actively shaping its historical and cultural destiny. Number 38, the 38th transformation was the alteration in the very aesthetics of beauty and art. Sassanian art, with its emphasis on royal power, was characterized by a certain formalism and monumentality. Beauty was found in the depiction of idealized, powerful figures, in the richness of materials like gold and silver, and in the symmetrical and hierarchical composition of scenes. The Islamic conquest introduced a new set of aesthetic values, with the theological prohibition on idolatry leading to a general avoidance of figural representation in religious art. Beauty was sought elsewhere. It was found in abstraction, in the intricate and endlessly repeating patterns of geometry that suggested the infinite nature of God. It was found in the flowing, organic lines of the arabesque, which represented the beauty of the natural world as God's creation. And above all, it was found in the sublime beauty of calligraphy, where the divine word was made visually manifest. This did not mean Persian art became entirely abstract. In secular contexts, particularly in the art of the book, a magnificent tradition of miniature painting flourished. But even here, the aesthetic had changed. The focus was less on realistic depiction and more on creating a perfect, idealized, and jewel-like world on the page, a world of vibrant color, delicate detail, and poetic harmony. This transformation gave birth to a new visual language, a new way of seeing and representing the world. The grand imperial art of the Sassanians was replaced by an art that was often more intricate, more abstract, and more focused on the interplay of pattern, color, and line, an aesthetic that would become one of the most recognizable and influential in the world. Number 39. The 39th transformation was the introduction and eventual dominance of a new architectural form, the mosque. The primary place of worship in Sassanian Iran was the fire temple, a structure designed to house the sacred flame, which was the focus of ritual. Many were built around a central domed chamber on a square base, known as a Achaha Taki. The conquest introduced the mosque, an entirely new building type with a different set of functional and symbolic requirements. The mosque was oriented towards Mecca. It needed a large covered space for communal prayer, haram, an open courtyard, sun, and a minaret from which to issue the call to prayer. In the early years, conquered fire temples were simply converted into mosques. But soon, a unique Iranian mosque style began to develop, one that brilliantly fused the architectural needs of Islam with the building traditions of ancient Persia. A key innovation was the four-Iwank mosque. This design organized the mosque around a central courtyard with a massive, vaulted Iwani, a legacy of Sassanian palaces, marking the entrance on each of the four sides, the largest one indicating the direction of Mecca. This created a powerful and harmonious new architectural language. Persian builders also became masters of dome construction and decorative brickwork, and later they covered their mosques in breathtakingly intricate blue tilework, a feature that would become the hallmark of Persian Islamic architecture. This transformation did more than just change the appearance of religious buildings. It fundamentally altered the urban skyline and the visual identity of every city and town in Iran, making the dome and the minaret the dominant symbols of the new faith. Number 40. The 40th transformation was a fundamental change in the relationship between religion and the state. In the Sassanian Empire, the Zoroastrian faith and the monarchy were seen as two pillars of the same structure, famously expressed in the adage, "Religion and kingship are two brothers." The Zoroastrian Church was a national institution, its hierarchy integrated into the state apparatus, and the king was its divinely appointed protector. The Islamic Caliphate initially presented a model where religious and political authority were fused in the person of the Caliph, the successor to the Prophet. However, as the Caliphate's political power fragmented, a practical separation of powers emerged. The real political and military power fell into the hands of sultans, emirs, and shahs, who were often secular, military rulers. The religious authority, meanwhile, became the domain of the independent class of ulama. This created a new dynamic in Iran, one that was very different from the Sassanian model. The political ruler, the sultan or shah, provided order and security, while the ulama provided religious legitimacy and administered the law. These two powers were often in a state of tension and codependence. The rulers needed the ulama to legitimize their rule in the eyes of the populace, while the ulama needed the rulers to enforce their legal judgments and protect the lands of Islam. This transformation established a dual authority structure at the heart of Iranian society that would persist for centuries. The complex relationship between the men of the sword and the men of the pen, between the temporal power of the state and the spiritual power of the clergy, would become one of the central dramas of post-conquest Iranian history. Number 41st. The 41st transformation was the birth of a new literary archetype, the Sufi saint, who replaced the pre-Islamic epic hero as the primary model of human perfection in popular literature. The hero of the Shahnameh, like the mighty Rostam, was a warrior whose virtues were courage, loyalty, and superhuman strength in battle. His world was one of epic conflict, a struggle for the honor of his king and the defense of Iran against its enemies. While the warrior ideal remained potent, the Islamization of Iran and the rise of Sufism introduced a new kind of hero, the saint or wali. The hero of the vast body of Sufi literature was not a warrior of the battlefield, but a warrior of the soul. His struggle was not against foreign armies, but against the inner demons of ego, desire, and pride. His virtues were piety, humility, asceticism, and a deep, all-consuming love for God. The hagiographies of these saints, filled with tales of their miracles, their ascetic feats, and their profound wisdom, became a hugely popular genre of literature, circulating widely among all classes of society. These stories provided the people with new role models and a new understanding of the heroic life. The ideal was no longer simply to defend the kingdom of Iran, but to achieve spiritual proximity to God. This literary and cultural shift represented a profound internalization of values, moving the focus of heroism from external deeds of martial prowess to the internal struggle for spiritual purification, a transformation that reshaped the moral and ethical imagination of the civilization. Number 42. The 42nd transformation was the complete absorption of the Sassanian monetary and financial system, which was then used as the foundation for the coinage of the new empire. The Sassanian silver drachma was a coin of remarkable stability and quality, trusted in international trade far beyond the empire's borders. The coins featured a portrait of the reigning Shahanshah on the obverse and a Zoroastrian fire altar with two attendants on the reverse, potent symbols of the Sassanian state and religion. For decades after the conquest, the Arab governors simply continued to strike coins of the Sassanian type, sometimes adding a short Arabic inscription like Bismillah in the name of God in the margins. This practical decision speaks volumes about the prestige of the Sassanian system and the conqueror's initial reliance on existing institutions. The first major monetary transformation occurred under the Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik in the late 7th century. He initiated a sweeping reform, replacing all the old Byzantine and Sassanian-style coins with a new, purely Islamic coinage. These new coins were radically different. They were entirely epigraphic, containing no images at all. Instead, they were covered in beautifully rendered Kufic script, bearing verses from the Quran and statements of Islamic faith. This change was a powerful political and religious statement, a declaration of the new civilization's independence from the visual language of the old empires. Yet, the underlying standards of weight and purity for the new silver dirham were based directly on the Sassanian drachma. Thus, even in the act of creating a distinctively Islamic coinage, the caliphate built upon the solid monetary foundations laid by its Persian predecessors, another example of transformation through absorption. Number 43. The 43rd transformation was the reshaping of the agricultural landscape itself through the introduction and popularization of the Persian garden. While gardens had existed in Iran since the time of the Achaemenids, the word paradise comes from the old Persian word for a walled garden. It was during the Islamic period that the Persian garden was perfected and transformed into a powerful cultural and spiritual symbol. The classic Persian garden, or Shahar Bagh Hoat, 4 gardens, was a walled enclosure divided into 4 quadrants by water channels that met at a central pool or pavilion. This design was not merely decorative, it was a deeply symbolic representation of paradise as described in the Quran, with its 4 rivers of water, milk, wine, and honey. The garden was a microcosm of this celestial paradise, a tranquil and orderly oasis that stood in contrast to the harsh, arid landscape outside its walls. It was a space for contemplation, for poetry, for music, and for spiritual communion. The development of the Persian garden as a central element of art, architecture, and daily life was a unique synthesis. It took a pre-Islamic form, the royal pleasure garden, and infused it with the spiritual and eschatological vision of Islam. This transformed garden became one of Persia's most enduring and influential cultural exports, its design principles spreading to Mughal India, Moorish Spain, and beyond, forever shaping the art of landscape design across the world and leaving a beautiful living testament to the creative fusion of two traditions. Number 44. The 44th transformation involved the decline of the Zoroastrian oral tradition and its partial replacement by a new culture of the book. Zoroastrianism was a religion with a vast body of sacred literature, the Avesta, but for much of its history this was primarily transmitted orally by a highly trained priesthood. The act of memorization and precise recitation was a sacred duty. While the Sassanians had committed the Avesta to writing, the oral transmission remained central. The conquest and the subsequent decline of the priesthood dealt a devastating blow to this tradition. As the number of trained magi dwindled, so did the living chain of oral transmission. Islam, by contrast, was fundamentally a religion of the book. The Quran was a written text from the beginning, and its study, recitation, and interpretation formed the core of the faith. This created a new cultural orientation that was profoundly text-based. Scholarship, piety, and law were all rooted in the written word. While oral traditions remained important in Islam, particularly in Sufism and poetry, the ultimate authority always resided in the sacred text. This shift from a primarily oral to a primarily literate religious culture had far-reaching consequences. It contributed to the freezing of the Zoroastrian tradition, which struggled to adapt without its living clerical interpreters, while it fueled the dynamic intellectual growth of the Islamic sciences, which were based on a vast and expanding body of written commentary and scholarship. The transformation established the book, rather than the priest, as the central vessel of sacred knowledge. Number 45. The 45th transformation was the change in Iran's relationship with the Turkic peoples of Central Asia. The Sassanians had viewed the Turkic tribes on their northeastern frontier primarily as a threat, a barbarian force, to be contained by a series of border fortifications. They engaged in constant warfare with groups like the Hephthalites and the Gökturks to secure their borders. The Islamic conquest of Iran and Transoxiana fundamentally altered this relationship. As the Turkic peoples were gradually converted to Islam, they ceased to be seen as external enemies of the faith and instead became integrated into the fabric of the Islamic world. They entered the caliphate, not as conquerors at first, but as soldiers. The Abbasids, seeking a loyal military force to counterbalance their powerful Persian and Arab factions, began to import large numbers of Turkic slave soldiers, or ghulams. These soldiers, renowned for their equestrian skills and martial prowess, soon became the dominant military force in the Eastern Islamic world. By the 10th and 11th centuries, their commanders began to seize political power for themselves, establishing dynasties like the Ghaznavids and the Seljuks. This transformation had a paradoxical outcome. Iran, which had been conquered by the Arabs, now found itself ruled by Turkic military elites. However, these new Turkic rulers, being culturally unsophisticated, readily adopted the high culture of the people they ruled. They became ardent patrons of Persian poetry, art, and architecture, and they used the Persian language for their administration. This created a new tripartite social structure in medieval Iran, with a Turkic ruling military class, an Arabic-speaking religious class, and a Persian-speaking bureaucratic and literary class, a synthesis that would define the region for centuries. Number 46. The 46th transformation was the creation of a vast body of Islamic law and theology in the Persian language. For the first few centuries, Arabic was the exclusive language of religious scholarship. However, as the Persian language reasserted itself, a monumental intellectual effort began to translate and explain the Islamic sciences in Persian. This was a crucial step in the full Islamization of the Iranian populace. It made the complex details of Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh, and theology, kalam, accessible to Iranians who were not fluent in Arabic. Great scholars began to write comprehensive works on Islamic law, Quranic commentary, and theological doctrine in clear and elegant Persian prose. This process did more than just translate existing knowledge. It created a new tradition of Persian religious scholarship. This had two major effects. First, it solidified the foundations of Islam in Iran, allowing its teachings to penetrate deeply into the culture. Second, it helped to further develop and refine Persian prose, turning it into a precise instrument for abstract and analytical thought. The creation of this religious literature ensured that Persian would not just be a language of poetry and history, but also a language of faith and intellect. It was a final confirmation of the unique Perso-Islamic synthesis. The faith was from Arabia, but it would be understood, interpreted, and taught in the language of Iran. Number 47, the 47th transformation was the profound psychological impact of the conquest itself, which created a sense of historical rupture and a lasting cultural trauma that found expression in Iranian literature and thought. The fall of the Sassanian Empire was not just a change of dynasty, it was the collapse of a world that had been perceived as eternal and divinely ordained. This catastrophic event left a deep scar on the collective psyche. This sense of loss and melancholy became a recurring theme in Persian literature. The final pages of the Shahnameh, which describe the conquest, are imbued with a profound sense of tragedy and foreboding. The poem laments the passing of an age of glory and the arrival of a new, harsher reality. This narrative of a golden age lost became a powerful and enduring trope in Iranian culture. This did not necessarily translate into a rejection of Islam. As we have seen, Iranians embraced and profoundly shaped Islamic civilization. Rather, it created a complex cultural attitude, a kind of melancholic pride. There was pride in the achievements of ancient Persia, a sense of its cultural superiority, coupled with a tragic awareness that this greatness had been brought low. This psychological transformation fostered a powerful drive for cultural preservation. The passionate revival of the Persian language, the meticulous recording of pre-Islamic history, and the celebration of ancient festivals like Nowruz can all be seen as responses to this initial trauma, a collective effort to ensure that the memory of the old world would not be extinguished by the new. Number 48. The 48th transformation was the introduction of new technologies and sciences from the broader Islamic world into Iran. While Persia was a major contributor to the Islamic Golden Age, the flow of knowledge was not one way. The unified territory of the Caliphate created a vast conduit for the transmission of ideas and technologies. From the Arab heartlands came advances in the study of grammar and lexicography. From Egypt came knowledge of optics and medicine. From Islamic Spain came new developments in agronomy and botany. The science of alchemy, which would evolve into modern chemistry, was pursued across the empire, with key texts and techniques traveling freely between scholars in different regions. Persian scholars were in constant dialogue with their counterparts across the Islamic world, reading their books, corresponding with them, and building upon their work. The institution of the Hajj, the annual pilgrimage to Mecca, also facilitated this exchange, bringing together people and ideas from every corner of the Muslim world. This transformation meant that Iran was no longer an isolated or self-contained intellectual sphere, exchanging ideas primarily with its immediate neighbors. It was now an integral part of a massive, dynamic, and interconnected intellectual ecosystem. This constant influx of new ideas and discoveries from across the Islamic world was a major factor in the vibrancy and longevity of the scientific and philosophical tradition within Iran itself, preventing intellectual stagnation and constantly providing new avenues for inquiry. Number 49. The 49th transformation was the shift in the understanding and practice of charity and social welfare. In the Sassanian system, charitable acts were encouraged by Zoroastrianism, but there was no formalized empire-wide system of social welfare. The Islamic conquest introduced the institution of waqf, awqaf, a concept that would have a massive and enduring impact on Iranian society. A waqf is a pious endowment in which an individual donates a property or a source of revenue in perpetuity for a charitable or religious purpose. The donated asset could not be sold or inherited, and its profits were used to fund a specific cause, such as a mosque, a madrasa, a hospital, a public fountain, or support for the poor. This institution provided a legal and financial mechanism for the private funding of public works and social services on a massive scale. Over the centuries, a vast amount of wealth, particularly in the form of land and commercial property, was converted into awqaf. This had two transformative effects. First, it created a large and resilient civil society sector that was independent of the state. These endowments provided the financial backbone for the religious, educational, and social institutions of the country. Second, it profoundly shaped the urban landscape, as many of the most beautiful and important buildings in Iranian cities were built and maintained through the waqf system. The introduction of this institution was a fundamental transformation in how society cared for its members and funded its public institutions, creating a new model of social welfare based on the principle of perpetual religious charity. Number 50. The 50th transformation was the ultimate emergence of a new political and cultural synthesis that can be called Persianati, civilization. This is perhaps the most holistic and important transformation of all. After centuries of absorption, adaptation, and innovation, what emerged in Iran and the surrounding regions was not a pale copy of Arab Islamic culture, nor was it a simple continuation of Sassanian civilization under a new guise. It was something entirely new. This Persianid civilization was Islamic in its religion and ethical framework, but its language of literature and administration was Persian. Its political ideal was the majestic, absolute monarch of Sassanian tradition, legitimized by Islamic authority. Its art and architecture fused Sassanian forms with Islamic aesthetics. Its intellectual life combined the scientific heritage of Greece, Persia, and India with the theological inquiries of Islam. This model proved to be remarkably successful and influential. As Turkic and later Mongol rulers came to dominate the region, they too were absorbed into this cultural framework. They held military power, but they adopted and patronized Persianate culture, spreading it across a vast territory. From the Ottoman court in Istanbul to the Mughal court in Delhi, the language, poetry, and etiquette of the elite were all profoundly shaped by this Persianate model. The ultimate transformation, therefore, was the creation of a new, durable, and highly influential cultural paradigm that would become one of the most important centers of the pre-modern world. It demonstrated that the conquest had not been a simple erasure, but a catalyst for a complex and brilliant act of civilizational recreation. Number 51st. The 51st transformation was the change in dietary laws and culinary practices, a subtle but fundamental aspect of daily life. The Zoroastrian faith had its own set of dietary guidelines, but the introduction of Islamic halal rules brought a new and codified system. The prohibition of pork and alcohol, two items that had been part of some pre-Islamic Persian diets, became a defining feature of the new food culture. While the prohibition on alcohol was not always strictly observed, especially in elite and poetic circles where wine became a powerful metaphor, it nonetheless removed winemaking from the center of mainstream culture. More importantly, the method of slaughtering animals was now governed by strict Islamic ritual. Beyond these prohibitions, the integration of Iran into a vast Islamic empire created a culinary renaissance. New ingredients, spices, and cooking techniques flowed into Persia from India, the Arab lands, and North Africa. The Persian cuisine that developed during the medieval period was a sophisticated fusion, blending the ancient traditions of the Sassanian court with new influences. Elaborate rice dishes, flour-jashed kalisht, and sweets flavored with rose water and saffron became the hallmarks of this refined cuisine. The culinary arts was celebrated in literature, and the kitchens of the caliphs and sultans at Baghdad were legendary, often run by Persian chefs. This transformation of the palate was a reflection of the broader cultural synthesis. It took the indigenous products and traditions of Iran and enriched them with a new set of religious laws and a vast array of international influences, creating a culinary tradition that was both uniquely Iranian and part of a larger, cosmopolitan Islamic world. Number 52. The 52nd transformation was the creation of a new tradition of manuscript illumination and the art of the book. While the Sassanians had a literary tradition, the culture of producing lavishly illustrated books was not as central as it would become in the Islamic period. The Islamic emphasis on the sacred text of the Quran, combined with the Persian love for epic and lyric poetry, created the perfect conditions for a flourishing art of the book. The introduction of paper was the technological key, but the driving force was a new cultural synthesis. Wealthy patrons, sultans, viziers, and merchants commissioned magnificent handwritten copies of the Quran, the Shahnameh, and the works of poets like Nizami and Hafiz. These were not just texts, they were works of art. The finest calligraphers would transcribe the text in elegant script, master illuminators would decorate the pages with intricate gold and lapis lazuli designs, and brilliant painters would create jewel-like miniature paintings to illustrate the stories. The Persian miniature painting tradition that developed was a world of its own, an idealized and poetic vision of reality. It blended Chinese artistic influences, which arrived after the Mongol invasions, with the narrative traditions of Persia. This art form, with its vibrant colors, lack of perspective, and meticulous detail, became one of the most celebrated achievements of Persian culture. The transformation lay in the elevation of the book itself into a primary object of high art, a vessel where calligraphy, painting, and literature came together to create a perfect whole, a testament to the new civilization's profound reverence for both the written word and visual beauty. Number 53. The 53rd transformation was the reshaping of Iran's relationship with the Caucasus region to its north. For the Sassanians, the Caucasus, modern-day Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan was a crucial strategic frontier, a buffer zone against both the Byzantine Empire and the nomadic peoples of the steppe. They invested heavily in fortifications, like the Great Wall at Derbent, to control the mountain passes. The region's inhabitants were largely Christian Armenians and Georgians, with whom the Zoroastrian Sassanians had a complex relationship of rivalry and intermittent alliance. The Arab conquest pushed Sassanian and Byzantine power out of the region and brought it into the orbit of the Islamic Caliphate. The process of Islamization in the Caucasus was slow and uneven. While Azerbaijan gradually adopted Islam and eventually the Shia form from Safavid Iran, Georgia and Armenia remained staunchly Christian, retaining their religious and cultural identities despite centuries of Muslim rule. This transformation changed Iran's role from being a direct imperial master in the region to being the primary source of Islamic cultural and religious influence. For the next millennium, the Caucasus would be a contested zone between Iranian-based empires like the Seljuks, Safavids and Qajars and their rivals, first the Byzantines, then the Ottomans, and finally the Russians. Iran's relationship with the region was no longer defined by a Zoroastrian Christian dynamic, but by a new and more complex set of relationships between Shia Islam, Sunni Islam, and Eastern Christianity, a legacy that continues to shape the geopolitics of the region today. Number 54. The 54th transformation was the decline and marginalization of the Aramaic language and its speakers within the former Sassanian lands. For centuries, Aramaic in its various dialects, such as Syriac, had been a major lingua franca of the Near East, spoken widely by Christian and Jewish communities within the Sassanian Empire. In the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, it was the language of the majority of the population. The Sassanian administration itself used Aramaic for many purposes. The Islamic conquest initiated the gradual decline of Aramaic's prominence. Arabic, a sister Semitic language, replaced it as the language of government and, increasingly, of daily life in Mesopotamia. As the Christian and Jewish populations of Iraq and Western Iran slowly converted to Islam over the centuries, they also tended to adopt the Arabic language. This linguistic shift was a major demographic and cultural transformation. While Syriac survived as the liturgical language of various Eastern Christian churches, and pockets of Aramaic speakers endure to this day, it lost its status as a major language of civilization. Its role as the primary language of Christian scholarship in the region was also eclipsed by the rise of Arabic. This transformation further consolidated the linguistic map of the region, leaving Arabic dominant in Mesopotamia and Persian dominant on the Iranian plateau, and marginalizing the ancient language that had once bridged the two worlds. Number 55. The 55th transformation was the change in philosophical and popular understandings of medicine and the human body. Sassanian medicine, centered at Gundishapur, was a sophisticated syncretic tradition, blending the humoral theory of the ancient Greeks with the medical knowledge of India and Persia. Health was seen as a balance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The Islamic conquest not only preserved this knowledge, but also integrated it into a new theological framework. Illness and health were now seen as being ultimately subject to the will of God. This led to the development of what is known as prophetic medicine, Tib and Nabawic, a body of knowledge based on the health-related sayings and practices of the Prophet Muhammad. This tradition emphasized diet, hygiene, and the use of natural remedies like honey and black seed. The great Persian physicians of the Golden Age, like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina, brilliantly merged the two traditions. They were masters of Greek humoral theory, but they operated within an Islamic worldview. Their great medical encyclopedias, which became the standard texts for centuries, seamlessly combined clinical observation and rational analysis with references to God's power and the importance of faith in healing. This transformation created a holistic medical system, where the physical health of the body and the spiritual health of the soul were seen as interconnected. It established a medical paradigm that would dominate not just the Islamic world, but also medieval Europe for centuries. Number 56. The 56th transformation was the development of a sophisticated culture of diplomacy and statecraft that was Persian in style but Islamic in its legal framework. Sassanian diplomacy was that of a great empire characterized by elaborate court protocol, a network of spies and emissaries, and a view of the world as divided between itself and its great rival, Rome. The Islamic Caliphate had to develop its own system of international relations, governed by the principles of Sharia law. Islamic law divided the world into the Dar al-Islam, or Out-Islam, and the Dar al-Harba, House of War, and it laid out detailed rules for treaties, ceasefires, and the treatment of ambassadors. As the Abbasid Caliphate became more Persianized, its diplomatic practices took on the flavor of the Sassanian court. Ambassadors were received with spectacular displays of wealth and power designed to awe them into submission. The art of courtly flattery, the exchange of lavish gifts, and the use of intricate and elusive language became hallmarks of Islamic diplomacy. The personnel of this diplomatic corps were often drawn from the educated Persian scribal class. This transformation created a new diplomatic synthesis. The goals and legal framework were Islamic, to protect and expand the Dar al-Islam, but the methods and style were deeply indebted to the imperial traditions of Persia. This Perso-Islamic model of statecraft would be inherited by subsequent dynasties, from the Ottomans to the Mughals, and it established a tradition of sophisticated and pragmatic diplomacy that allowed the Islamic world to engage with a wide range of foreign powers for over a millennium. Number 57. The 57th transformation was the creation of new opportunities for social mobility, which, while limited, were greater than under the rigid Sassanian caste system. As previously noted, the Islamic message of equality before God theoretically broke down the hereditary barriers of the old society. In practice, new hierarchies based on ethnicity, wealth, and proximity to power quickly formed. However, there were new avenues for a talented individual of humble origins to rise. One of the most important of these was through military service. The Ghulam system, while based on slavery, allowed a young boy captured or purchased from the frontiers to rise to the highest ranks of the military and even to become a provincial governor or the founder of a dynasty. Another avenue was through religious education. A bright boy from a poor family who could excel in his studies at a madrasa could become a respected judge or scholar, wielding significant social and moral authority. A third path was through commerce, as the expanding trade networks of the Islamic world created vast fortunes for clever merchants and entrepreneurs. While the majority of the population remained peasant farmers with little chance of advancement, these new paths were significant. They provided a safety valve for the ambitions of talented individuals and injected a new dynamism into society. This transformation replaced a society based almost entirely on the accident of birth with one in which talent, piety, and military prowess could, for some, provide a path to power and prestige. Number 58. The 58th transformation was the change in the popular conception of magic, divination, and the supernatural. The Zoroastrian world was populated by a host of spiritual beings, both good and evil, and the Magi were believed to be masters of rituals that could harness supernatural powers. The world of Islam was also one in which the supernatural was very real. It included the belief in angels, demons, and the jinn, powerful, unseen beings created from fire who could interact with and influence humans. The Quran itself speaks of magic, mozi or as a real and dangerous power. After the conquest, the Islamic framework for the supernatural was laid over the existing Persian folk beliefs. The ancient Persian divs, demons, were often conflated with or seen as a type of jinn. Pre-Islamic spirits and magical practices were reinterpreted through an Islamic lens. A new science of divination, known as Ilm al-Ram, the science of sand, which had Arab origins, became popular. Astrology, which had been highly developed in Sassanian Persia, was also absorbed into Islamic culture, with many caliphs and sultans consulting astrologers before making important decisions. This transformation created a rich and complex popular cosmology, a world teeming with supernatural forces that could be both a source of danger and a source of power. While Orthodox Islamic scholars often condemned many of these practices as superstition, they remained deeply embedded in the popular imagination. This syncretic world of magic and spirits represented the fusion of Arab, Persian, and other ancient traditions, creating a folk religion that was far more varied and colorful than the formal doctrines of the theologians. Number 59. The 59th transformation was the decline of the Sassanian feudal structure centered on the Daikokans and its replacement with a more centralized and later more fragmented system of land control. The Daikokans were the backbone of the Sassanian provincial administration. They were a class of small to medium landowners, the village lords who lived on their estates, administered local justice, collected taxes for the central government, and served as cavalry in times of war. They were the crucial link between the imperial center and the rural population. The chaos of the conquest and the subsequent confiscation of lands severely weakened this class. While many Dakwans converted and held on to their positions for a time, their power was gradually eroded. The Arab Caliphate preferred to appoint its own governors to the provinces, and the Ikite system of land grants to soldiers created a new, non-local elite. The decline of the Daikokans was a major social and political transformation. It broke the long-standing hereditary connection between the local leadership and the peasantry. The state became more centralized in some respects, with governors reporting directly to the capital, but it also became more disconnected from the rural grassroots. In later centuries, as the central authority of the caliphate weakened, the Ikte system evolved into a more de facto hereditary form of feudalism. But the new lords were often Turkic military commanders, not the native Persian gentry. The loss of the Daikwan class represented the dismantling of the very social and administrative fabric of Sassanian rural society. Number 60. The 60th transformation was the introduction of Arabic script and the subsequent revolution in calligraphy as a major art form. The Pahlavi script used for Middle Persian was complex and ambiguous, with many letters representing multiple sounds. The Arabic script, in contrast, was clearer and more adaptable. Following the conquest, it was adopted for writing the newly emerging New Persian language. This was a momentous change. The adoption of the Arabic script visually and symbolically linked Persia to the wider Islamic world. But the transformation went beyond mere utility. Because of the Islamic proscription against figural imagery in religious contexts, calligraphy became the highest of all art forms. The act of beautifying the written word, especially the word of the Quran, was considered an act of piety. Persian artists and scribes became masters of this new art form. They not only perfected the existing Arabic scripts, like the stately Kufic, but they also developed new, uniquely Persian styles. The most famous of these is Nasta Lik, a fluid and elegant cursive script that was developed in the 14th century. Its beautiful, flowing lines were considered perfectly suited to writing Persian poetry. The elevation of calligraphy to the status of a major art and the development of distinctively Persian styles was a transformation that created a new and enduring field of artistic expression. It turned the written word into a vehicle for both communication and profound aesthetic and spiritual experience. Number 61st. The 61st transformation was the change in naval power and maritime trade in the Persian Gulf. The Sassanian Empire had maintained a strong navy in the Gulf, which it used to control the lucrative trade routes to India and to project its power into the Arabian Peninsula. Its main naval base was at the port of Siraf. The Islamic conquest brought the entire Persian Gulf coast under the control of a single power for the first time in centuries. The early caliphate built upon the Sassanian naval heritage, using ports like Siraf and Basra to build a vast commercial fleet. Persian sailors, shipbuilders, and merchants were at the heart of this maritime enterprise. For several centuries during the early Islamic period, the Persian Gulf became an Islamic lake, a bustling hub of international trade that connected the Middle East to India, Southeast Asia, and China. Merchants from Siraf established trading posts as far away as the Chinese coast. This transformation integrated the Persian Gulf into a much larger maritime economic system stretching across the entire Indian Ocean. It brought unprecedented wealth to the port cities and fueled the growth of the Islamic economy. However, this golden age eventually came to an end. The decline of the Abbasid Caliphate, political instability, and the eventual silting up of harbors like Siraf led to a decline in the Gulf's prominence. This transformation from Sassanian naval power to an Islamic commercial boom and eventual decline fundamentally reshaped the geopolitical and economic importance of Iran's southern coast. Number 62, the 62nd transformation was the creation of a vast body of Persian prose literature, a development that paralleled the flourishing of poetry. While Sassanian Iran had a prose tradition, much of it was administrative, legal, or religious in nature. The rise of New Persian in the Islamic era saw the birth of a sophisticated and varied artistic prose. One of the earliest and most important genres was history, as scholars like Balami translated and adapted the great Arabic chronicles of Al-Tabari into Persian, making the history of Islam accessible to a Persian-speaking audience. Another important genre was the mirror for princes, works of political advice for rulers that carried on the Sassanian tradition of statecraft literature. A third major development was the emergence of Sufi prose, as mystics wrote treatises, discourses, and hagiographies to explain their doctrines and preserve the stories of their saints. Perhaps the most famous masterpieces of Persian prose are the Gulistan, the Rose Garden, and the Bustan, the Orchard, by the poet Sadi. These works are collections of moral tales, aphorisms, and personal anecdotes, written in a clear, elegant, and witty style that has been admired and imitated for centuries. The development of this rich prose tradition was a crucial transformation. It proved that Persian was not only a language for epic and lyric poetry, but also a powerful and flexible medium for history, philosophy, ethics, and storytelling. It created a balanced literary culture and laid the foundations of modern Persian prose. Number 63, the 63rd transformation was the reshaping of the mythology of kingship. The Sassanian kings claimed descent from the mythical Pishtidian and Kayanian dynasties of the Avesta, and their legitimacy was rooted in this ancient pre-Zoroastrian past. They were divinely appointed rulers, holders of the sacred Kavarena. After the conquest, the old royal mythology was officially discredited. The new source of legitimacy was Islam. Rulers, whether they were Arab caliphs, Persian Samanids, or Turkic Seljuks, now had to justify their rule in Islamic terms. They were the commanders of the faithful, the defenders of the faith, or the shadow of God on earth. However, the old Persian mythology of kingship proved too powerful to be completely erased. It survived in the Shahnameh and in the popular imagination. Astute rulers learned to blend the two traditions. They would present themselves as devout Muslim rulers while simultaneously adopting the ancient Persian titles like Shahanshah and the lavish, majestic ceremonial of the Sassanian court. They would patronize Islamic scholars and build mosques, but they would also commission magnificent copies of the Shahnameh that depicted them as the heirs to the ancient Persian kings. This transformation created a dual theory of legitimacy. The ruler's power was derived from both his role as a defender of Islam and his position as the inheritor of a thousand-year-old tradition of Iranian monarchy. This potent and enduring synthesis of Islamic and Persian royal mythology would define the institution of kingship in Iran right up to the 20th century. Number 64. The 64th transformation was the change in the nature and scale of slavery. Slavery existed in the Sassanian Empire as it did in all ancient societies, but the Islamic conquests expanded the practice on a massive scale. The conquests themselves produced a huge number of captives who were enslaved and distributed among the victorious armies. Furthermore, the expansion of the caliphate created a vast and integrated slave market that brought people from many different parts of the world into the Islamic heartlands. Slaves were brought from sub-Saharan Africa, from the Turkic lands of Central Asia, and from the Slavic regions of Eastern Europe. They were used for a wide variety of purposes. Some worked as domestic servants, some as agricultural laborers on large plantations, and some, as we have seen, were trained as elite soldiers in the Ghulam system. While Islamic law granted slaves certain rights and protections and considered it a virtuous act to free a Muslim slave, the institution itself was a fundamental part of the social and economic fabric of the medieval Islamic world. For Iran, this transformation meant the creation of a more diverse, multi-ethnic society, but it was a diversity built upon a foundation of profound inequality and coercion. The presence of large numbers of slaves, particularly the Turkic military slaves who would eventually seize power, had a transformative and often destabilizing effect on the politics and society of the time. Number 65. The 65th transformation was the introduction of new philosophical and theological debates that challenged and reshaped the religious landscape. Zoroastrianism had its own internal debates, but the arrival of Islam introduced a host of new and complex theological questions. Many of these debates were fueled by the encounter between Islamic revelation and the legacy of Greek philosophy. A major school of thought that emerged, known as the Mu'tazila, championed the use of reason and logic in theology. They argued for the createdness of the Quran and for human free will, ideas that were highly controversial. Many Persian scholars were drawn to these rationalist debates. Another major current was Ash'arism, which emerged as a reaction against the Mu'tazila and became the dominant theological school in Sunni Islam. It sought a middle ground between pure reason and literalist faith. Alongside these theological debates, the rise of Shiism in Iran introduced a whole new set of doctrines, centered on the concept of the imamate, the esoteric interpretation of the Quran, and the role of martyrdom. The introduction of these complex and often heated intellectual contests transformed the religious life of Iran from one of relative uniformity under a state-controlled Zoroastrian church to one of vibrant, dynamic, and often contentious debate among various Islamic schools of thought. This created a highly sophisticated and intellectually fertile environment that was one of the hallmarks of the medieval period. Number 66. The 66th transformation was the development of a distinct legal culture around the Jafari school of jurisprudence, which became the foundation of Shia law in Iran. The majority of the Sunni Muslim world came to follow one of four major schools of law, or madhabs. The Shias, however, developed their own legal tradition. The Jafari school, named after the sixth Imam, Jafar al-Sadiq, is the school of law for Twelver Shias. When the Safavids declared Shiism the state religion of Iran in the 16th century, they also made the Jafari school the official law of the land. This was a transformation of immense significance. The entire legal apparatus of the country, the courts, the judges, the laws of inheritance, contract, and criminal justice, was now based on Jafari principles. This legal system differs from the Sunni schools on a number of points, including inheritance law, the rules for temporary marriage, muta, and the role of the clergy. A key feature of Jafari jurisprudence is the doctrine of ijtihad, the principle that qualified senior clerics, or mujtahids, have the right to use independent reasoning to derive new legal rulings from the sources of the law. This gave the Shia ulama a degree of intellectual dynamism and authority that was different from their Sunni counterparts. The establishment of Jafari law in Iran created a legal system that was distinct from that of its Sunni neighbors and further solidified Iran's unique identity within the Islamic world. Number 67. The 67th transformation was the profound impact of the Mongol invasions of the 13th century, which, while not a direct result of the Arab conquest, completely reshaped the Perso-Islamic world that had been created in its wake. The Mongol conquests were a cataclysm of unparalleled destruction. They sacked and burned major Iranian cities like Nishapur and Rey, massacred millions of people, and destroyed the ancient irrigation systems, turning vast areas of fertile land into desert. The invasion brought an end to the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad and shattered the political unity of the Eastern Islamic world. However, the aftermath of this destruction led to another surprising transformation. The Mongol rulers of Iran, known as the Ilkhans, eventually converted to Islam and became great patrons of Persian culture. The Ilkhanid period saw a remarkable flourishing of art and architecture, characterized by new influences from China, including motifs like the dragon and the phoenix. It was also a golden age for science, particularly astronomy, as the great observatory at Marageh was built under Ilkhanid patronage. The political fragmentation caused by the Mongol invasions also allowed for the rise of local dynasties and Sufi orders, which would play a key role in the subsequent history of Iran. The Mongol invasions were thus a second great trauma, a destructive wave that washed over the Perso-Islamic civilization that had been built over the previous 6 centuries. Yet, once again, the culture proved its resilience, absorbing its new conquerors and producing a new artistic and intellectual synthesis from the ashes of the old. Number 68. The 68th transformation was the change in the technology and culture of warfare. The Sassanian army was built around the heavy cataphract, a force designed for shock action against the disciplined infantry of the Roman legions. The Arab armies that conquered Iran were of a completely different type. They were predominantly light cavalry and infantry, highly mobile and accustomed to the hit-and-run tactics of desert warfare. Their strength lay in their speed, their discipline, and their religious motivation. In the centuries after the conquest, the nature of warfare in the region continued to evolve. The introduction of Turkic soldiers brought the skills of Central Asian horse archery to the forefront. The later Mongol invasions introduced new tactics of massed cavalry charges and sophisticated siege warfare. A crucial technological transformation was the eventual introduction of gunpowder in the 14th and 15th centuries. This rendered the old forms of fortification and the dominance of heavy cavalry obsolete. The Safavid Empire, which came to power in the 16th century, was one of the gunpowder empires. Its strength was based not just on the fierce loyalty of its Qizilbash cavalry, but also on its effective use of cannons and muskets. This long-term military transformation, from the Sassanian cataphract to the Arab light cavalry, to the Turkic horse archer, and finally to the Safavid musketeer, reflected the changing political and technological realities of the region and fundamentally altered the way power was won and maintained. Number 69. The 69th transformation was the creation of a uniquely Persian sense of humor and satire. While humor is universal, its specific forms are culturally shaped. The political and social realities of post-conquest Iran, with its succession of foreign rulers, Arabs, Turks, Mongols, and the ever-present tension between temporal power and religious authority, created fertile ground for a particular brand of satire. This was often a subtle, sophisticated, and deeply ironic humor, a way of criticizing the powerful without risking one's head. A master of this form was the 13th century writer Ubad Zakhani, whose satirical works poked fun at the hypocrisy of clerics, the arrogance of rulers, and the foolishness of society. The folklore of the period also produced the character of Mullah Nasruddin, a wise fool whose paradoxical stories and witty remarks often contained a sharp satirical point. This tradition of using humor and satire as a form of social and political commentary became a deeply ingrained part of Persian culture. It was a coping mechanism, a way of maintaining intellectual independence and cultural sanity in the face of often oppressive rule. This transformation gave Persian culture a new and powerful tool for self-critique and resistance, a tool that was very different from the grand epic seriousness of the pre-Islamic tradition. Number 70. The 70th transformation was the emergence of a new textile industry that would make Persian carpets famous around the world. Weaving had been a highly developed art in Sassanian Iran, but the Islamic period saw new developments in technique, design, and use. The carpet was not just a floor covering, it was a central element of daily life and art. It was used for prayer, for sitting, and as a symbol of wealth and status. The designs of Persian carpets became a canvas for the new artistic vocabulary of the Islamic world. They were filled with the intricate floral arabesques, geometric patterns, and calligraphic inscriptions that characterized other art forms. Many carpets depicted scenes from Persian literature or idealized garden landscapes, turning the floor into a woven paradise. The Safavid period, in particular, was the golden age of the Persian carpet. The Shahs established royal workshops that produced carpets of incredible size, complexity, and beauty, using the finest materials like silk and precious metal threads. These carpets were not only used in the palaces of Iran, but were also exported as luxury goods to Europe and the rest of the Islamic world, becoming one of Iran's most famous and sought-after products. This transformation elevated the craft into a major art form and a key industry, creating an object that was both utilitarian and a sublime expression of the new Perso-Islamic aesthetic. Number 71. The 71st transformation was the development of a sophisticated system of water management adapted to the new urban and agricultural needs of the Islamic era. Ancient Persia was the home of the Akhenat, a remarkable technology of underground aqueducts that brought water from mountain aquifers to the arid plains. The Sassanians maintained and expanded this system. The Islamic period saw the continued use and maintenance of the qanats, but also the development of new hydraulic technologies. Engineers and mathematicians wrote detailed treatises on hydraulics, and new techniques were developed for building dams, reservoirs, and urban water distribution systems. Cities were equipped with public fountains and bathhouses, hammams, which were not only important for hygiene but also served as key social centers. The management of water resources was a complex affair, governed by Islamic law, which had detailed rules about water rights and distribution. This legal and technological framework allowed for the expansion of agriculture and the growth of large cities in a largely arid environment. This transformation represented the continuity and refinement of ancient technologies within a new legal and social context. It was a testament to the practical genius of the civilization and a crucial factor in its economic prosperity and long-term sustainability. Number 72, the 72nd transformation was the creation of a vast network of roads and caravanserais that facilitated trade and travel across the empire. The Sassanians had maintained the excellent road system inherited from the Achaemenids, but the peace and unity of the early Islamic Caliphate, combined with the boom in commerce, led to a major expansion of this infrastructure. A key innovation of the Islamic period was the widespread construction of the caravanserai. These were roadside inns located about a day's journey apart on major trade routes that provided a safe place for merchants, pilgrims, and other travelers to rest and recuperate. A typical caravanserai was a fortified rectangular building with a single large gateway enclosing a central courtyard. Around the courtyard were stables for the animals and small rooms for the travelers. They were crucial pieces of infrastructure, the medieval equivalent of the motel. The construction of this network, often funded by rulers or as charitable wakfs endowments, was a major transformation of the physical landscape. It stitched the vast territory of Iran and Central Asia together, making long-distance travel safer and more reliable. It was this network that carried the silk, spices, ideas, and armies that defined the medieval era, and it was the essential backbone of the commercial and cultural vitality of the age. Number 73. The 73rd transformation was the change in Iran's ethnic and demographic makeup. Sassanian Iran, while ruling over diverse peoples, was dominated by an Iranian-speaking population. The Arab conquest brought an initial influx of Arab tribesmen who settled in the new garrison cities. While they were a small minority, their language and culture had an immense impact. The subsequent centuries saw further waves of migration. The reliance on Turkic slave soldiers led to a significant Turkic presence, which was massively amplified by the invasions of the Seljuks and the Mongols. These Turkic groups, originally nomadic pastoralists from Central Asia, settled in various parts of Iran, particularly in the northwest, Azerbaijan, and the northeast. Over time, many of these groups adopted Persian culture and language, but others retained their Turkic dialects, creating large new linguistic minorities. There were also smaller migrations of other groups. This long process of migration and settlement transformed Iran from a relatively homogeneous Iranian society into a more complex, multi-ethnic and multilingual one. While the Persian cultural and linguistic identity remained dominant, the society was now a mosaic of Persians, Arabs, Turks, Kurds, and other groups. This demographic transformation created a richer, more diverse culture, but it also introduced new ethnic tensions and rivalries that would become a recurring feature of Iranian history. Number 74. The 74th transformation was the creation of a new relationship with the Central Asian heartland. For the Sassanians, Central Asia, Transoxiana, was a frontier to be defended. For the Islamic Caliphate, it became a new province to be conquered and integrated. The conquest of this region in the 8th century by Arab and Persian forces was a major turning point. The region's inhabitants, a mixture of Iranian-speaking peoples like the Sogdians and Turkic tribes, were gradually converted to Islam. This transformation had two huge consequences. First, it brought the vast and strategically important region of Central Asia firmly into the orbit of Islamic civilization. Cities like Bukhara and Samarkand became major centers of Persian Islamic culture and scholarship, producing some of the greatest minds of the age, including Ibn Sina and the collector of hadith, Imam al-Bukhari. Second, it turned Iran from being the eastern edge of the empire into the geographical and cultural center of the Eastern Islamic world. Iran was now the bridge that connected the Arab heartlands with the newly Islamized Turkic and Iranian peoples of Central Asia. This new role as a cultural hub for a vast Persian-speaking world stretching from Iraq to the borders of China would define Iran's position for centuries to come. Number 75. The 75th transformation was the change in the nature of religious dissent and heresy. The Sassanian state faced its own religious challenges, most notably from the radical social and religious movement of Mazdakism, which it brutally suppressed. The Islamic period saw the emergence of a wide variety of new religious movements that were often a syncretic blend of Islamic, Zoroastrian, and other ancient Iranian beliefs. In the early centuries, a series of rebellions were led by figures who claimed to be prophets and who often preached a heterodox form of Islam that incorporated elements of the old religions. The most famous of these was the movement of Babak Khorramdin in the 9th century, which represented a major challenge to the authority of the caliphate. Later, new forms of heresy emerged from within Islam itself, such as the Ismaili or Assassin movement, a radical offshoot of Shiism that established a powerful and secretive state in the mountains of northern Iran. This transformation meant that the religious landscape was far more fragmented and contentious than it had been under the Sassanians. The state and the Orthodox ulama were in a constant struggle to define and enforce correct belief and to suppress what they saw as dangerous heresy. This long history of religious dissent and heterodoxy contributed to the intellectual dynamism of the period, but it also led to periods of intense persecution and conflict. Number 76. The 76th transformation was the development of a sophisticated metalworking industry that fused Sassanian techniques with Islamic aesthetics. Sassanian metalworkers were masters of their craft, producing magnificent silver and gold plates, bowls, and ewers, often decorated with scenes of royal hunts or courtly life. After the conquest, this tradition continued, but the subject matter and style began to change. While early Islamic metalwork still showed strong Sassanian influence, the depiction of human figures became less common. Instead, craftsmen focused on intricate arabesque patterns, geometric designs, and beautiful calligraphic inscriptions. A key technological innovation of the Islamic period was the perfection of inlaying techniques, where brass or bronze objects were elaborately decorated with inlaid strips of silver and copper. This allowed for the creation of incredibly detailed and beautiful designs. Cities like Herat became famous for producing this high-quality inlaid metalwork. This transformation took the superb technical skills of the Sassanian artisan and applied them to a new artistic vocabulary. It created objects that were not only luxurious and beautiful, but also powerful statements of the new Islamic culture, with their surfaces covered in verses from the Quran or blessings upon their owners. Number 77. The 77th transformation was the complete disappearance of the Manichaean religion from its Persian homeland. Manichaeism, a Gnostic religion founded by the prophet Mani in the 3rd century CE, had its origins within the Sassanian Empire. It was a syncretic faith that blended elements of Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Buddhism. For a time, it had a large following and was a major rival to the Zoroastrian state church. The Sassanians, seeing it as a dangerous heresy, periodically persecuted the Manichaeans with great brutality. Under early Islamic rule, the Manichaeans were initially tolerated. However, they were soon accused of being dualist heretics, ridis and deek, and became the target of intense persecution by the Abbasid caliphs. This new wave of persecution, combined with the attractions of both Islam and the still surviving Christian communities, proved to be the death knell for the religion in its birthplace. By the 10th century, Manichaeism had been effectively eradicated from Iran and Iraq. This transformation represented the final victory of the Abrahamic monotheistic traditions over the ancient Gnostic and dualistic faiths of Persia. While Zoroastrianism managed to survive as a small embattled minority, its old rival, Manichaeism, was completely extinguished in the new religious environment created by the Islamic conquest. Number 78. The 78th transformation was the changing status and role of the Jewish community in Iran. Jewish communities had existed in Persia since the time of the Achaemenid Empire and had generally thrived under the Sassanians, who, for the most part, allowed them religious autonomy. The Talmud of Babylon, one of the central texts of Rabbinic Judaism, was compiled in the Jewish academies of Sassanian Mesopotamia. The Islamic conquest brought the Jews of Persia under the same dhimmic status as the Christians and Zoroastrians. They were a protected minority, allowed to practice their religion in exchange for paying the jizya tax and accepting a subordinate social status. In some ways, their position improved, as they were now part of a vast and interconnected Jewish world that stretched across the entire Islamic Caliphate, from Spain to Persia. Jewish merchants, scholars, and physicians played an important role in the life of the Islamic world. However, their status was always precarious. While periods of tolerance were common, there were also times of persecution and forced conversion, particularly under more zealous rulers. This transformation shifted the legal and social context of Jewish life in Iran. They were no longer a minority in a Zoroastrian empire, but a minority in a new Islamic one. Their fortunes would now be tied to the shifting policies of the various caliphs, sultans, and shahs who would rule Iran for the next 14 centuries. Number 79. The 79th transformation was the creation of a new tradition of historical writing that focused not on kings and empires, but on cities and local communities. While the Grand Chronicles of the Caliphate, written in Arabic, focused on the political history of the entire Islamic world, a new genre of history writing emerged in Persian. These were local histories, books that told the story of a single city or province, such as the History of Bukharak or the History of Sistan. These works were a rich source of information about the social, cultural, and religious life of medieval Iran. They recorded the lives of local saints and scholars, the building of mosques and madrasas, and the customs and traditions of the people. This new focus on local history was a significant transformation. It reflected the political fragmentation of the later Abbasid period, as local dynasties fostered a sense of regional pride. But it also reflected a new bottom-up view of history, one that saw the life of the community as being just as worthy of record as the deeds of great rulers. This tradition of local historiography preserved a vast amount of information that would otherwise have been lost, and gives us a much richer and more detailed picture of medieval Iranian society than we could ever get from the court chronicles alone. Number 80. The 80th transformation was the change in the culture of personal grooming and hygiene. The Sassanian elite had a sophisticated culture of grooming, but the arrival of Islam introduced a new set of practices rooted in religious concepts of ritual purity, tahara. Islamic law places a strong emphasis on cleanliness as a prerequisite for prayer. This includes the practice of ritual ablution, wudu, before each of the 5 daily prayers. This religious requirement led to the widespread construction of fountains in the courtyards of mosques and homes. Another major development was the popularization of the public bathhouse, or hammam. While bathhouses existed in the pre-Islamic world, they became a central institution of social and religious life in the Islamic city. The hammam was not just a place to wash, it was a place to socialize, to relax, and to conduct business. It was also essential for performing the full-body ablution, ghusl process required after certain activities. The emphasis on hygiene also extended to personal grooming, with traditions derived from the practice of the Prophet, encouraging the trimming of the mustache, the perfuming of the body, and other practices. This transformation embedded the values of ritual purity and cleanliness deep within the daily life of the culture, making the bathhouse a cornerstone of urban society and turning the act of washing into an act of religious significance. Number 81, the 81st transformation was the development of a distinctively Persian style of government correspondence and official prose, known as inshas. As the Persian language re-emerged for administrative use under dynasties like the Samanids and Seljuks, a new style of official writing was developed. This style was highly ornate, filled with elaborate compliments, Quranic quotations, poetic allusions, and complex rhetorical devices. It was designed to be impressive and to reflect the power and sophistication of the court. Mastering this style required a high level of education, and manuals were written to teach aspiring scribes the art of composing elegant and effective official documents. The development of this elaborate prose style was a transformation that set the tone for official and scholarly writing for centuries. While modern Persian prose has moved towards a simpler style, the legacy of insha can still be seen in the love of ornate and poetic language in certain contexts. This transformation was another assertion of Persian cultural identity. Even when dealing with the practical matters of state, the writing had to be beautiful and artistic, a reflection of a culture that valued literary elegance as much as administrative efficiency. Number 82, the 82nd transformation was the rise of new religious and political centers of power within Iran, shifting the internal balance of the country. Under the Sassanians, the center of power was in the west, in Mesopotamia, Ctesiphon and Fars Istakhr. The northeastern province of Khorasan, while important, was a frontier region. The Islamic conquest and its aftermath dramatically changed this. Khorasan, on the border with Central Asia, became a crucible of the new Perso-Islamic identity. It was the heartland of the Abbasid Revolution and the birthplace of the Persian literary renaissance under the Samanids. Cities like Nishapur, Merv, Herat, and Balkh became the leading cultural and intellectual centers of the Eastern Islamic world. Later, as Turkic dynasties rose to power, the northwest, the region of Azerbaijan, with its rich pasture lands for the nomadic armies, became a new center of military and political power. Cities like Tabriz would serve as the capital for several major dynasties. This internal reshuffling of power was a major transformation. It led to the rise of new cities and the relative decline of some of the older centers of Sassanian power in the south and west. This new internal geography, with its multiple and sometimes competing centers of power, would characterize Iran for much of the medieval and early modern periods. Number 83, the 83rd transformation was the creation of a new relationship between the urban and nomadic populations. The Sassanian state was an agrarian empire that had a largely adversarial relationship with the nomadic tribes on its borders, seeing them as a threat to be managed. The Islamic period, particularly after the arrival of the Seljuk Turks, created a new and more integrated, if often tense, relationship. The Turkic dynasties that ruled Iran were themselves of nomadic origin. While the rulers and the elite settled in the cities and adopted Persian urban culture, they retained close ties to their tribal followers, who continued a nomadic or semi-nomadic lifestyle in the country's vast pasture lands. This created a society with a dual structure, a settled Persian-speaking urban and agricultural population, ruled by a Turkic-speaking, tribally organized military elite. This Turco-Persian symbiosis became a defining feature of the region. The nomads provided the military power, while the settled population provided the administrative skills and the economic surplus. This transformation created a long-lasting social and political dynamic that was fundamentally different from the Sassanian model. The interplay between the tent and the throne, between the nomadic tribe and the settled city, would be a central theme in Iranian history for the next 800 years. Number 84. The 84th transformation was the change in the understanding of cosmology and the structure of the universe. The Zoroastrian cosmology was based on a dualistic struggle between the forces of light and darkness. The Islamic conquest introduced a new cosmological model derived from the Quran and heavily influenced by the Ptolemaic system of the ancient Greeks. In this model, the Earth was the stationary center of the universe, surrounded by a series of concentric celestial spheres in which the moon, the sun, the planets, and the stars were embedded. This geocentric model was elaborated upon by Persian astronomers and philosophers who created a detailed and sophisticated picture of the cosmos. But it was more than just a scientific model, it was a spiritual one. The celestial spheres were often associated with angels and spiritual intelligences, and the entire cosmos was seen as a harmonious and orderly creation that pointed to the unity and power of God. This new understanding of the universe became deeply embedded in the culture, appearing in poetry, philosophy, and art. The journey of the soul was often imagined as an ascent through the celestial spheres towards the divine presence. This transformation replaced the dualistic cosmology of ancient Persia with a hierarchical and monotheistic one that would dominate the intellectual and imaginative world of Iran until the dawn of the modern scientific revolution. Number 85. The 85th transformation was the development of a complex network of Sufi orders, or tariqas, which became a major feature of the religious and social landscape. While early Sufism was a pursuit of individual mystics, from the 12th century onwards, it became institutionalized into organized brotherhoods. Each order had a founder, a specific set of devotional practices, and a chain of spiritual transmission linking the current master back to the Prophet Muhammad. These orders established lodges, gwash, in cities and towns, which served as community centers, hostels for travelers, and schools for spiritual instruction. They became powerful social networks, offering spiritual guidance, charity, and a sense of community to their members. In Iran, these Sufi orders became incredibly popular and influential, attracting followers from all classes of society, from rulers to artisans. Some orders became wealthy and politically powerful, and the leaders of the Safavid order would eventually use their network of loyal followers to conquer Iran and establish a new dynasty. The rise of these orders was a major transformation of the religious landscape. They created a new layer of religious organization that existed alongside the formal hierarchy of the ulama. They provided an institutional structure for the mystical piety that had become so popular in Iran, and played a crucial role in the social, political, and spiritual life of the country for centuries. Number 86. The 86th transformation was the development of a tradition of Islamic political thought written in Persian. While the early mirrors for princes were often translations from Middle Persian into Arabic, from the 11th century onwards, a new and important body of political philosophy was written directly in New Persian. One of the most important of these works was the Siyasat-Nama, the Book of Government, written by the great Seljuk Vizier, Nizam al-Mulk. This book is a practical guide for rulers on how to govern effectively. It blends Islamic principles with the pragmatic, absolutist statecraft of the Sassanian tradition and the new realities of ruling a Turco-Persian empire. It gives advice on everything from holding court and managing the army to appointing spies and dispensing justice. The emergence of this genre was a significant transformation. It signaled that Persian was now a language capable of handling the highest levels of political and philosophical discourse. More importantly, it codified the political synthesis that had been developing for centuries. These Siyasat-Nama and other works like it created a distinctively Persianate theory of government, one that was deeply influential and provided the ideological blueprint for rulers in Iran and beyond for the next 500 years. Number 87. The 87th transformation was the complete change in funereal practices and the architecture of tombs. Zoroastrian funereal rites were based on the principle of not defiling the sacred elements of earth, fire, or water with a dead body. The dead were typically exposed on high places, towers of silence, to be consumed by scavenger birds. The Islamic conquest introduced the practice of burial in the earth, as was the custom of the Prophet. This was a fundamental change in one of the most personal and conservative of all human rituals. In addition to the practice of burial, the Islamic period in Iran saw the development of a magnificent tradition of tomb architecture. While simple burial was the early ideal, a culture of building elaborate mausoleums for rulers, saints, and important scholars soon developed. These tombs ranged from simple tomb towers to grand domed structures that were often the centerpiece of a larger religious complex. The construction of these magnificent tombs was a major architectural transformation of the landscape. They became important sites of pilgrimage and symbols of dynastic power and religious piety. The tradition of building monumental tombs for the revered dead was a stark departure from the exposure rites of the Zoroastrians and created a new and powerful link between architecture, memory, and sacred space. Number 88. The 88th transformation was the creation of a new cultural hero, the poet. In Sassanian society, the most revered figures after the king and the high priest were the great warriors. While poets and minstrels existed at court, they did not have the same central cultural role they would later acquire. The Perso-Islamic period saw the elevation of the poet to a position of immense prestige and cultural importance. Great poets like Ferdowsi, Rumi, Saadi, and Hafiz were not seen as mere entertainers. They were regarded as sages, philosophers, and even saints. Their works were not just read for pleasure. They were studied, memorized, and quoted in all situations, from the court of the Shah to the stall of the artisan. Their tombs became shrines, and their poetry became the primary vehicle for the expression of the civilization's highest ethical, spiritual, and aesthetic values. The Divan of Hafiz, for example, came to be used as a tool for divination, a testament to the popular belief in its profound wisdom. This transformation placed literature, and specifically poetry, at the absolute center of the culture. The ability to appreciate and recite poetry became the hallmark of an educated person, and the poet became the quintessential voice of the Iranian soul. This reverence for the poet as a figure of wisdom and authority is one of the most distinctive and enduring features of Iranian civilization. Number 89. The 89th transformation was the development of a distinctively Iranian tradition of ceramics. While pottery is an ancient craft, the Islamic period in Iran saw an explosion of creativity and technical innovation in the ceramic arts. Potters mastered a wide range of techniques, including lusterware, which gives a metallic iridescent sheen to the glaze, minayi ware with its colorful enamel-like painting, and the use of cobalt blue. The designs on these ceramics reflected the new artistic vocabulary of the age. They were decorated with elegant calligraphy, intricate, geometric, and arabesque patterns, and scenes from Persian literature depicting the adventures of heroes from the Shahnameh or romantic tales. These ceramics were not just utilitarian objects, they were luxury goods, highly prized both in Iran and as exports. The city of Kashan, in particular, became famous for its exquisite tilework and lusterware. This artistic transformation turned the humble medium of clay into a major vehicle for the new Perso-Islamic aesthetic. The beauty and sophistication of Iranian ceramics from this period are a testament to the creativity of its artisans and the refined tastes of their patrons, and they represent one of the high points of Islamic art. Number 90. The 90th transformation was the ultimate failure of Arabization in Iran, a process that stands in stark contrast to the experience of other conquered regions in the Middle East. In Syria, Egypt, and North Africa, the Arab conquests led not only to Islamization, but also to Arabization. The local languages, Aramaic, Coptic, and Berber, were gradually replaced by Arabic, and the populations eventually came to identify as Arabs. In Iran, this did not happen. Despite centuries of Arab rule, the dominance of Arabic as a religious and scientific language, and a significant influx of Arabic vocabulary, the Persian language survived and ultimately thrived. The population continued to speak Persian and to identify as Persian or Iranian. This Persian exception is one of the most significant outcomes of the entire post-conquest period. Its reasons are complex, involving the vast size and population of Iran, the existence of a strong pre-Islamic state and cultural identity, and the conscious efforts of the Persian elite during the 10th century Renaissance to preserve and promote their language. This ultimate failure of Arabization was the transformation that ensured all the other transformations would result not in the erasure of Iran, but in the creation of a new and distinct Perso-Islamic civilization. It guaranteed the survival of a unique cultural and linguistic identity within the broader world of Islam. Number 91. The 91st transformation was the development of a new naval and cartographic tradition in the Persian Gulf. Building on Sassanian and earlier traditions, sailors and geographers of the Islamic era, many based in Persian Gulf ports, created a rich body of knowledge about the Indian Ocean. They were masters of celestial navigation, using instruments like the astrolabe to chart their position. They produced detailed sailing charts and manuals, randomogs, that described the sea routes, the winds and currents, the locations of ports, and the landmarks along the coast. The stories of their voyages, full of fantastical tales of giant birds and magnetic mountains, would eventually find their way into literature, most famously in the stories of Sinbad the Sailor from 1001 Nights, which are set in the great port city of Basra. The geographers of the period, many of them Persian, also produced comprehensive world maps and geographical encyclopedias that described the known world in unprecedented detail. This transformation of maritime knowledge turned the Indian Ocean from a space of myth into a space of commerce and science. It was the intellectual foundation for the great maritime trade boom of the early Islamic period and represented a major contribution to the global history of navigation and exploration. Number 92, the 92nd transformation, was the creation of a new musical theory and a codification of the melodic modes. The highly developed musical practice of the Sassanian court was largely based on an oral tradition. The Islamic period saw the first systematic attempts to write down and analyze musical theory, a process that was heavily influenced by the translation of ancient Greek musical treatises. Persian philosophers and musicologists like Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina were pioneers in this field. They wrote major works on music theory, analyzing the mathematical and physical principles of sound, classifying the rhythmic and melodic modes, maqamat, and naiti-an melodic modes, maqamat, and describing the various musical instruments in use. This theoretical work was a major intellectual transformation. It turned the art of music into a science. This process of codification helped to preserve and transmit the musical heritage of the region, and it laid the foundation for the development of the classical music systems that are still in use in Iran, the Arab world, and Turkey today. It was another example of the synthesis of Greek rationalism, Persian artistic practice, and the new intellectual environment of the Islamic world. Number 93. The 93rd transformation was the rise of the vizier as the central figure of the administration, an office that was a direct continuation of Sassanian practice but became even more powerful in the Islamic context. The Sassanian state had a chief minister, the oversword Framadar, who oversaw the bureaucracy. The Abbasid Caliphate adopted this office, calling it the wazir, vizier. Vizier became the absolute head of the civilian administration, second in power only to the caliph himself. As the caliphs retreated into the seclusion of their palaces, it was the viziers who ran the empire. The most famous of these were the Persian Barmakid family, who for several decades in the early Abbasid period held vast and unchecked power. Later, under the Seljuk Turks, the great vizier Nizam al-Mulk was the true architect of the empire. This transformation institutionalized the power of the Persian bureaucratic class at the very heart of the Islamic State. It created a model of government where the ruler, the caliph or sultan, reigned, while the vizier, usually a man of the pen with deep administrative experience, ruled. This system, which balanced the military power of the monarch with the administrative power of the chief minister, became the standard model of governance in the Eastern Islamic world for centuries. Number 94. The 94th transformation was the development of a complex system of patronage that fueled the cultural and artistic achievements of the age. In the Sassanian system, the primary patron was the Shahanshah. In the Islamic period, the sources of patronage became much more diverse. While the caliphs and sultans were major patrons, so too were their viziers, provincial governors, wealthy merchants, and high-ranking military commanders. This created a competitive market for talent. A skilled poet, a brilliant scientist or a master architect could travel from court to court, seeking the most generous patron. This system of patronage was the economic engine of the Islamic Golden Age. It funded the translation of books, the construction of mosques and observatories, the production of lavishly illustrated manuscripts, and the livelihoods of thousands of intellectuals and artists. This transformation created a new social and economic context for culture. Intellectual and artistic production was not just a matter of individual genius, it was a social enterprise driven by the ambitions and tastes of a powerful and wealthy ruling class who saw the patronage of culture as a way of displaying their power, piety, and sophistication. Number 95. The 95th transformation was the change in the popular attitude towards the Arab conquerors themselves, which evolved over time from resentment to a more complex form of emulation and integration. In the immediate aftermath of the conquest, there was undoubtedly widespread bitterness and resistance. The early anti-Arab rebellions and the rise of the Shu'ubiyya movement were clear expressions of this. However, as the majority of the population converted to Islam, a new relationship began to form. The Prophet Muhammad and his family, who were Arabs, became the central figures of religious devotion. The Arabic language was revered as the sacred language of God's final revelation. Pious Muslims in Iran would name their children after the heroes of early Islam and would trace their own spiritual lineage back to Arabia. This led to a complex cultural negotiation. Iranians remained fiercely proud of their own heritage, yet they also embraced the religious and cultural prestige of the Arab heartland of Islam. This transformation can be seen in the way the Persian language itself adopted thousands of Arabic words. It was a process of looking to Arabia for religious authority while simultaneously seeking to preserve and assert a distinct Persian cultural identity. This duality, a respect for the Arab origins of the faith combined with a deep-seated Persian national consciousness, remains a key feature of Iranian culture. Number 96. The 96th transformation was the development of a strong tradition of pilgrimage to local and regional shrines, which existed alongside the universal pilgrimage of the Hajj. While the Hajj to Mecca was the ultimate religious duty, for most people it was a once-in-a-lifetime journey. A more accessible form of piety was the ziyarata, or pilgrimage to a local holy site. As noted earlier, Iran became dotted with the tombs of Shia imams, saints, and Sufi masters. These shrines became the focus of a vibrant popular religion. People would travel to them to seek blessings, to pray for healing, or to fulfill a vow. Each shrine developed its own unique set of rituals and traditions, and they became important centers of local identity and economic activity. The rise of this shrine-based piety was a major transformation of religious practice. It created a sacred landscape that was both local and universal. It allowed people to participate in the sanctity of the Islamic tradition in a direct and tangible way, without having to travel to the distant cities of Arabia. This network of sacred shrines embedded Islam deep into the local soil of Iran and created a powerful bond between the people, their land, and their faith. Number 97. The 97th transformation was the profound and lasting influence of the Persian language and culture on the Ottoman Empire, one of the most powerful states of the early modern world. The Ottoman Turks, who would come to rule a vast empire from their capital in Istanbul, were, like the Seljuks before them, deeply influenced by Persianate culture. For centuries, Persian was the language of diplomacy, high literature, and art at the Ottoman court. The Ottoman sultans styled themselves after the Persian kings. They read the Shahnameh and they wrote poetry in the Persian language. The literary and artistic traditions of Ottoman Turkey were to a very large extent built upon Persian models. This cultural transmission was a long-term consequence of the original Islamic conquest of Iran. The conquest had led to the creation of a powerful and prestigious Perso-Islamic culture, which was then adopted by the Turkic peoples who came to dominate the region. When these Turks then moved west into Anatolia and the Balkans, they carried this Persianate culture with them. This transformation ensured that the legacy of ancient Persia, as filtered through the Islamic era, would have a profound impact not just on Iran itself, but on the entire course of civilization in the Eastern Mediterranean and Southeastern Europe. Number 98. The 98th transformation was the eventual establishment of a national state, the Safavid Empire, which for the first time since the conquest unified Iran under a native dynasty and gave it the three pillars of its modern identity: a defined territory, the Persian language, and Shia Islam as the state religion. The centuries after the fall of the Sassanians had been a period of political fragmentation, with Iran ruled by a succession of Arab, Turkic, and Mongol dynasties. The rise of the Safavids in 1501 was a monumental transformation. They reunited the Iranian plateau under a single government. They made Persian the undisputed language of the state. And, as we have seen, they enforced Twelver Shi'ism as the national faith. This was the culmination of a long and complex historical process. It took the cultural identity that had been preserved by the Persian language, the religious identity that had evolved into a distinct form of Shi'ism, and the geographical entity of the Iranian plateau, and fused them together into a new and powerful national synthesis. The Safavid state was not a recreation of the Sassanian Empire. It was a new creation, a Shia Islamic empire that was nonetheless deeply conscious of its pre-Islamic Persian heritage. This transformation laid the direct foundations of the modern nation-state of Iran. Number 99. The 99th transformation was the creation of an enduring cultural memory of the conquest as a defining national tragedy. As immortalized by Ferdowsi in the Shahnameh, the fall of the Sassanian Empire came to be seen not just as a historical event, but as a symbolic moment of loss, the end of a heroic age, and the beginning of a long period of foreign domination. The poem's famous lament for the fall of the empire, predicting a time when honor and truth would be replaced by falsehood and weakness, became a cornerstone of Iranian historical consciousness. This narrative of a glorious past, lost to foreign invaders, became a powerful and recurring theme in Iranian political and cultural discourse. It was used by later dynasties to legitimize their own rule as a revival of Persian glory, and it became a key element of modern Iranian nationalism. This transformation of a historical defeat into a foundational element of national identity is a powerful example of how cultures make sense of traumatic events. The memory of the conquest, kept alive for over 1,000 years, has served as a constant source of both melancholy and resilience, fueling a deep-seated desire to preserve Iran's unique cultural identity against all outside pressures. Number 100. The 100th and final transformation is the profound and undeniable fact that the civilization of ancient Persia was not truly erased, but was instead absorbed, transmuted, and reborn as a foundational and indispensable pillar of Islamic civilization. The conquest was a brutal end to a political dynasty, but it was the beginning of a new and extraordinary cultural synthesis. The administrative genius of the Sassanians became the blueprint for the Abbasid Caliphate. The scientific and philosophical knowledge of Persia, Greece, and India, preserved and expanded upon by Persian scholars, fueled the Islamic Golden Age. The powerful artistic and architectural forms of ancient Iran were adapted to create a new and breathtakingly beautiful Islamic aesthetic. The Persian language, refusing to die, re-emerged to create one of the world's great literary traditions, a tradition that would enrich the entire Islamic world and beyond. And the very idea of a majestic, cultured, and divinely ordained kingship, a cornerstone of Sassanian political thought, became the model for Islamic rulers for a millennium. Therefore, the ultimate transformation was not an act of destruction, but an act of profound and often paradoxical creation. The storm from the desert toppled the ancient tree of the Sassanian Empire, but from its deep and powerful roots, a new tree grew, one that was nourished by the soil of ancient Iran, but which flowered in the new light of Islam, bearing a fruit that would change the world forever.